Welcome. This is a City Planning Commission review session for Monday, October 28th, 2019. Quorum is present and the time is 1:07 p.m. The first item on the agenda is a certification of a zoning map and zoning text amendments, special permit and city map amendment in Brooklyn, Community District 7. Our presenter is Connie Chan.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. The applicant, 110 Bush Terminal Owner LP and 1920 Bush Terminal Owner LP is seeking a zoning text amendment to establish a new special industry city district and create a new special permit applicable within the newly created special district, a zoning map amendment to map the special district and change an M31 district to an M24 district, a special permit to modify use, bulk, and other requirements within the newly created special district, and a city map change to demap a portion of a street. These actions would facilitate the renovation and reactivation of a complex of 16 historic buildings and the construction of 3 new buildings that would contain a total of up to 6.6 million square feet of industrial, commercial, and community facility uses. The project is located in the Sunset Park neighborhood of Brooklyn in Community District 7. Before I describe the project area, I'd like to give some background. What is known today as Industry City and is the subject of the proposed actions was formerly part of the larger historic Bush Terminal complex. You can see the extent of the Bush Terminal complex here in red on this map from 1910, with an approximate location of the current Industry City circled in blue. Bush Terminal operated as a multimodal facility comprised primarily of warehouse and distribution uses in a complex of buildings and piers beginning in the 1890s. Goods that arrived by barge were received by rail and then distributed to the rest of the city. In 1928, Bush Terminal employed 35,000 people and had its own court system, police force, and fire department. In the mid-1950s, Bush Terminal employed 25,000 workers and over 100 companies. However, employment began to decline following World War II as heavy manufacturing and large-scale warehouse distribution declined in New York City overall. In 2012, Bush Terminal employed fewer than 2,500 people. Industry City is the privately owned portion of the former Bush Terminal complex that is the subject of the proposed actions today. Much of the remainder of the Bush Terminal complex was acquired by the City of New York in the 1970s and is comprised of a number of buildings and piers that are partially or fully vacant. So here is an aerial map that shows the project area, which is outlined in yellow. The elevated Gowanus Expressway runs along the eastern boundary of the project area above 3rd Avenue. The area to the west of the Gowanus Expressway and 3rd Avenue towards the waterfront is predominantly comprised of a mix of industrial and commercial uses and vacant land. Immediately to the west of the project area, across 2nd Avenue, is the South Brooklyn Marine Terminal, otherwise known as SBMT. This is an 88-acre city-owned property, which is largely vacant with the exception of the Sims recycling facility, which is located on the 29th Street Pier on the northern portion of that property. The New York City Economic Development Corporation is leading an effort to reactivate 64 acres of SBMT as a major shipping hub. Immediately north of the project area is the Liberty View Industrial Plaza, which is an 8-story building containing over 1 million square feet, comprised of big box retail on the 1st and 2nd floors and industrial uses on the upper floors. South of 39th Street, between the waterfront and 3rd Avenue, there are predominantly small to mid-scale 1 to 2 story warehouses, industrial and auto-related uses with some multi-story loft buildings, including the southern portion of Industry City. The city-owned portion of Bush Terminal, which you can see kind of along the left side, the lower left corner of the aerial, this is the location of the city's Made in New York initiative, which is being led by the New York City Economic Development Corporation. Made in New York is focused on providing space for the garment manufacturing and the film and media industry. There's a big box grocery store, which is a Costco, which occupies a super block between 37th and 39th Streets and 2nd and 3rd Avenues. In 2006, a special permit and a zoning authorization were approved to allow the development of a retail establishment in excess of 10,000 square feet in an M1 district to facilitate this store. 3rd Avenue is a 180-foot wide street that is a major north-south vehicular artery and truck route. 3rd Avenue and the elevated Gowanus Expressway that runs above it separate the industrial neighborhood to the west from a mix of lighter industrial uses, commercial, residential, and community facility uses to the east. Along 3rd Avenue, there's a mix of small to medium-sized warehouses with commercial, storage, and industrial uses, and residential buildings that range from 2 to 4 stories in height. Further east, along 4th Avenue, there's a mix of 3-story mixed-use buildings with ground floor commercial and residential on the upper stories, as well as commercial and community facility uses. The primary vehicular east-west route in the area is 39th Street, which connects Sunset Park at the waterfront to Borough Park. 39th Street is 80 feet wide between the waterfront and 1st Avenue and 100 feet wide between 1st and 3rd Avenues. Institutional and community facilities in the area include the Metropolitan Detention Center, which is a federal detention facility located 3 blocks north of the project area. Sunset Park High School is located on 4th Avenue between 34th and 35th Streets, and PS 371, which is a public high school, is located on 4th Avenue between 36th and 37th Streets. Access to the D, N, R subway lines is located 1 avenue east of the project area at 36th Street and 4th Avenue. The applicants currently provide a shuttle service to and from Industry City connecting to this station. Public bus service is provided by the B37, which runs along 3rd Avenue and connects downtown Brooklyn to Bay Ridge, the B70, which connects the Sunset Park waterfront at 39th Street to Diker Heights, and the B35, which runs along 39th Street and provides service from Sunset Park to Brownsville. There's an active rail line that extends from the float bridge that's located along the waterfront at 65th Street further south to the Sims Recycling Facility at SBMT. This rail line crosses through the project area along 1st Avenue between 39th and 41st Streets before continuing north within the South Brooklyn Marine Terminal. The Brooklyn Waterfront Greenway Master Plan is a planned 26-mile pedestrian and bicycle path that will connect Greenpoint to Bay Ridge. Approximately 18 miles of the Greenway have been built. There's a section of the Greenway that is planned within and around the project area along 2nd Avenue that has not yet been built. Portions of the project area are located in the 100-year flood zone, and the entirety of the project area is located within the Southwest Brooklyn Industrial Business Zone. The 200-acre state and national register-eligible Bush Terminal Historic District is located along the Sunset Park waterfront from 32nd to 52nd Street. It is comprised of warehouses, loft buildings, and piers, and a portion of the project area is within this historic district. So here is a land use map. As you can see, the bulk of the project area, which is outlined with the black dashed line, is located within an M31 district, as well as all of the kind of area to the west of the project area as well. M3 districts permit the most intensive industrial uses, as well as a broad range of commercial uses. M31 districts have a maximum FAR of 2.0. Height and setback regulations permit a maximum base height before a setback of 60 feet or 4 stories, and overall height is governed by a sky exposure plane, and parking requirements vary depending on the use. South of the project area, between 2nd and 3rd Avenues, is an M12 district, and there is a very small portion of the project area along 3rd Avenue between 36th and 37th Street, which is located in this M12 district. M1 districts permit a range of commercial, industrial, and select community facility uses. A maximum FAR of 2.0 applies to the manufacturing and commercial uses, and a maximum FAR of 4.8 applies to those select community facility uses. Height and setback regulations permit a maximum base height before setback of 60 feet or 4 stories, with height governed by a sky exposure plane. And parking requirements vary depending on the use. East of the project area, between 3rd and 4th Avenues, north of 38th Street, is an M12D district. In addition to the regulations governing M1 districts, M12D districts permit limited new residential uses upon authorization by the City Planning Commission. The western terminuses of the mapped portions of several streets, specifically 32nd through 35th Streets, are located at varying lengths west of 3rd Avenue, and all are mapped at 60 feet wide. The prolongations of those streets that connect to 2nd Avenue are not mapped streets. They are privately owned, unmapped driveways. However, they're typically open to the public in terms of both vehicular and pedestrian traffic. In addition to the discretionary land use approvals related to the Costco that I mentioned earlier, there have been a number of prior CPC actions within the project area and in the surrounding area. These include the Community Board 7 Sunset Park 197A plan, which was approved in 2009 and provides a framework for the revitalization of the Sunset Park waterfront. In addition, multiple site selection and acquisition applications for storage and warehousing uses by a number of city agencies have occurred over the last several decades, both in the project area and in the surrounding area. So this is a diagram that shows the boundaries of the project area in the red dashed line, and you can see that it's comprised of two non-contiguous areas. This project area is comprised primarily of 11 tax lots that are currently owned by the applicant on which the existing Industry City complex is located today, and those are the areas that are shaded in red. In addition to the applicant-owned properties, the project area also includes 7 tax lots that are shaded in purple that the applicant intends to acquire and incorporate into the proposed development at a future date for the purpose of constructing new buildings. And finally, there are 3 tax lots. These are shaded in orange. These tax lots are affected by the proposed actions, but they are not part of the proposed development. So I'll describe each of these components kind of in order. So starting with the existing Industry City complex, which is shaded in red, again, this complex is comprised of 11 tax lots with a total lot area of 1.29 million square feet and 5.3 million square feet of floor area for a floor area ratio of 3.9 overall. The complex is comprised of 2 clusters of buildings known as the Finger Buildings and the 39th Street buildings. So now we'll take a closer look at the Finger Buildings, which is the complex to the north. The Finger Buildings are situated between 2nd Avenue and 3rd Avenue. They extend between 32nd Street to the north and 37th Street to the south. They are comprised of 10 buildings, numbered 1 through 10, as shown in the diagram. Finger Buildings 1 through 9 are 6-story structures that rise to 85 feet in height. Buildings 1 through 8 are connected at 3rd Avenue, forming a long U-shape with fingers. Building 9 is located on the north side of 33rd Street and mimics the built form of buildings 1 through 8, but is only half of a finger shape. Building 10, which is located at 33rd Street, located along 3rd Avenue between 32nd and 33rd Street, is 12 stories tall and rises sheer to 170 feet in height. So I'll show an aerial of the Finger Buildings from the perspective of the red cone shown in the upper right. So here's an aerial photo of the Finger Buildings facing south. You can see 2nd Avenue and the South Brooklyn Marine Terminal in the foreground. And in the lower left, in red, you can see a decommissioned powerhouse structure that is part of this complex. It's located on the corner of 32nd Street and 2nd Avenue. There are 97 off-street surface parking spaces that are located along the Finger Buildings, parallel to 37th Street, and along the privately owned prolongations of 32nd, 33rd, 34th, and 35th Streets. In addition to these off-street parking spaces, a portion of the South Brooklyn Marine Terminal has been leased for additional parking, and you can see some of that along 2nd Avenue. Buildings 1 through 8 contain central courtyards that open to 2nd Avenue. There are 3 publicly accessible courtyards in the U-shapes of Finger Buildings 1 and 2, 3 and 4, and 5 and 6. Each contains seating, passive recreational uses, landscaping, and seasonal programming. So here are some photos of the existing conditions. You can see entrances into 2 of these courtyards on the photos on the left. This is kind of a view from 2nd Avenue looking into the courtyard. In the upper right is a view from within one of the courtyards looking towards 2nd Avenue. And in the lower right, you can see an example of an elevated walkway. This is a structure, an example of a structure. Elevated walkways have been constructed along 34th, 35th, and 36th Streets alongside parallel to the Finger Buildings. These walkways provide ADA access and separate pedestrian traffic from vehicular traffic. So this is the photo in the lower right is one example. And here's another image that kind of shows the one of the conditions that these elevated walkways addresses, which is that they provide 39 loading berths that are parallel to the adjacent Finger Buildings. And these loading berths allow trucks to load without blocking through traffic. So you can see kind of 2 pictures that show a before and after condition. So before, you can see that there were loading berths that happen at an angle, and so trucks will kind of load at an angle, precluding kind of vehicular through traffic, and then kind of after picture of some of the areas that have been redone with elevated walkways allows for parallel loading, separates pedestrians from the street, and allows for vehicular traffic to move through. Here's some additional site photos of this portion of the project area. So on the left are two views along 2nd Avenue. Along the top is the view facing south. You can see the red powerhouse structure on the left. And on the bottom is the view of 2nd Avenue facing north, and you can see that the kind of open space to the left is the South Brooklyn Marine Terminal with the finger buildings on the right. On the right are two views along 3rd Avenue. So on top is the view facing south. You can see the elevated Gowanus Expressway on the left with building 10, which is the building that rises to 170 feet on the right. And on the bottom is the view facing north. So here are several views along the streets between the finger buildings, between 2nd and 3rd Avenues. In the upper left, you'll see 37th Street from 2nd Avenue facing east. Finger building 1 is the building that's on the left, and on the right, the building with the red kind of markings, that's the Costco. In photos number 2 and 3 are views of 35th and 36th Street from 3rd Avenue facing west towards 2nd Avenue. And in the lower right is the view along 32nd Street from 3rd Avenue facing west. The black building on the left is building 10, and you can see the powerhouse structure further down, and then the kind of open expanse on the right is the parking lot to the Liberty View Industrial Plaza. So here are some views from 3rd Avenue, from right underneath the Gowanus Expressway, facing east towards the upland portion of the neighborhood. So we see views of 33rd, 35th, and 37th Street. The lower right-hand photo is the view facing north along 3rd Avenue, and you can see the Liberty View Industrial Plaza building with the Gowanus Expressway to the right. So now we'll take a closer look at the 39th Street buildings. These are bounded by 39th Street to the north, 41st Street to the south, 2nd Avenue to the east, and the waterfront to the west. So again, I'll show an aerial from the perspective of the cone in the lower red. So this aerial is facing southwest. You can see South Brooklyn Marine Terminal in the foreground. The 39th Street buildings are predominantly 8-story structures that rise to 115 feet in height. There are 30 off-street surface parking spaces located in the central courtyard between buildings 19 and 20. And in this photo, you can also see the active rail line that crosses the project area along 1st Avenue between 39th and 41st Street. This portion of 1st Avenue is privately owned by the applicant. 40th Street, you can see the edge of it on the left side, labeled on the left side of this image, but 40th Street between 1st and 2nd Avenues, it is a mapped street. It's mapped at 60 feet wide and is approximately 700 feet long for a total area of 42,000 square feet, but it is unbuilt and is actually part of the tax lots on the rest of that block, which is block 706. And all of those tax lots are under private ownership. So here are some photos of the 39th Street buildings. The top 2 photos are views along the 39th Street frontage. So in the upper left is the view from 2nd Avenue facing west, and the upper right is the view from the terminus of 39th Street by the water, kind of facing east. The buildings you see on the right are buildings kind of 24, 25. In the lower left is the view south along 1st Avenue from 39th Street, and in the lower right is a direct view of building 24. This is the building that's closest to the waterfront at the end of 39th Street. Here, in the upper left, you see kind of the view facing south along 2nd Avenue from 39th Street. The building on the right with the Industry City label, that's building 19. In the upper right is the view facing west along 41st Street at 2nd Avenue. In the lower left is the view facing east along 41st Street at 1st Avenue. And in the lower right, this is kind of a direct frontal view of buildings 22, 23, and 26. In 2013, the owners of Industry City launched an initiative to rehabilitate the buildings and activate the complex, which is the largest privately owned industrial complex in the city. Since 2013, over $300 million has been spent on basic infrastructure to increase the utilization of the existing buildings. In addition to the work I described on the loading docks, this work includes the replacement of over 7,000 windows, electrical upgrades, roof improvements, new boilers and radiators, and other energy-related infrastructure. 3 of the 4 courtyards in the finger buildings were also developed as open green spaces in order to provide an amenity for workers and visitors that also improves connectivity across the site and improves site porosity, air quality, and allows for programming. Since 2013, the number of jobs has increased from 1,900 people at 150 businesses to over 7,000 people at more than 450 companies. Part of this initiative involved the creation of the Innovation Lab, a public-private partnership between Industry City and a number of local community-based organizations that provide a range of workforce development and vocational programs to residents. Services include job placement, technology and vocational training, internships, ESL classes, and small business support services. Since opening in 2016, the Innovation Lab has placed more than 300 people in jobs at Industry City, 30% of which were for residents of Sunset Park. And local youth are also connected to internships at businesses in Industry City through the Innovation Lab. Industry City contains an approximate mix of uses that's shown in this table. Approximately 50% of the existing square footage is occupied by storage and warehousing uses or is vacant. Existing manufacturing tenants include food producers, garment producers, and producers of specialty goods. Artisanal manufacturing and studio uses include artists, home decor designers, fashion workshops, as well as TV, film, and photo production and post-production studios. Office tenants include private firms and nonprofits, web designers, coders, architects, interior designers, and other professional services. Retail uses include eating and drinking establishments, food markets, repair shops, and variety stores, as well as furniture warehouse and repair establishments, some of which contain a significant accessory retail component. So now I will describe the areas within the project area that are shaded in purple. These, again, are the properties that the applicant intends to acquire and incorporate into the proposed development. So first, we'll take a look at the areas shaded in purple that are in the finger buildings along 3rd Avenue. So this area is comprised of 7 tax lots on Block 695, located along 3rd Avenue between 36th and 37th Streets. On the corner is a single-story cafe, and the 6 adjacent lots contain 3-story mixed-use buildings with ground floor retail and residential uses above. Combined with Lot 43, which the applicant owns and currently serves as a parking and loading area, all of these lots, which are outlined in the black dashed line, are referred to as the Gateway Parcel. This is the site of a proposed new building known as the Gateway Building. So the photo shows a view of the Gateway Parcel from 3rd Avenue looking north. So it begins just at the open space where there's a fence and includes the mixed-use buildings further north. So now we'll take a look at the other property in the 39th Street buildings that the applicant intends to acquire. So this is Lot 20 on Block 706, located on 39th Street between 1st Avenue and buildings 19 and 20. So the photo shows the 39th Street frontage of this lot. So the site contains a 3-story industrial building that's occupied by a manufacturer of plastic products. Along with the other tax lots on the block that the applicant owns, these lots are collectively referred to as the Building 21 parcel, which is outlined in the dashed black line. And this site is the site of the proposed new building 21. And then finally, shaded in orange, there are 3 tax lots that are affected by the proposed actions but are not part of the proposed development. So this includes part of Block 662, Lot 1, which is located at the western terminus of 39th Street at the top of the diagram, and lots 45 and 46 on Block 691, which front on 3rd Avenue between 35th and 36th Streets. So we'll take a look at the site near the waterfront. So this is a very small portion of the larger tax lot that the South Brooklyn Marine Terminal occupies. And there's a photo of that area, which it's currently vacant. And then here is a photo of the 2 tax lots on 3rd Avenue. So the corner lot is a 2-story building containing a ground floor retail use with an office above, and the adjacent lot is a 1-story retail building. The applicant seeks to create a center of industrial, commercial, and institutional employment while rehabilitating a complex of historic buildings on the Sunset Park waterfront and expanding the existing Industry City complex. The applicant seeks to create an innovation district, which they describe as an ecosystem comprised of a range of businesses involved in every step of the making process, from research and development to design and engineering, as well as the manufacturing of goods. Innovation economy businesses make products that fall into a variety of sectors, which include but are not limited to art and design, film and television, retail, fashion, technology, and food. The full vision for the proposed development is a plan that involves the rehabilitation of 16 existing buildings and the new construction of 3 buildings on a total of 19 tax lots with a total lot area of 1.3 million square feet. This would include up to 6.6 million square feet of development and an overall FAR of 4.97. The proposed development is projected to support over 15,000 jobs. The applicant seeks flexibility, both in terms of a broader range of uses as well as bulk regulations to allow for siting of different businesses and uses across the development as needs change over time. In addition, the proposed development seeks to provide a pedestrian-friendly environment that activates local streets and helps to connect the upland neighborhood to the waterfront. Many of the uses in the proposed development are present at Industry City today. These include office, some retail uses, art and production studios, and manufacturing uses, which are the core innovation economy uses. The applicant seeks to broaden the ranges of uses at the range of uses at Industry City to include uses that complement and support the primary job-generating innovation economy uses. These include college and universities, which would support new classroom, lab, and research facilities, and would provide a venue for innovators to interface on research, design, training, and education. And they will also allow businesses to have access to a pipeline of potential employees and facilitate access to higher education for workers on site. In addition to colleges and universities, libraries, museums, and non-commercial art galleries would support research and education initiatives of existing trade schools and the proposed new academic institutions. Hotels will serve new and existing businesses as they grow, providing prospective workers, partners, and visitors with direct access to the companies they are visiting. And these hotels would fill a gap in the market for business-oriented hotels that have meeting and conference facilities. A wider range of retail and services than what is currently permitted is being sought. A broader range of retail and services will support the existing businesses at Industry City, in addition to providing amenities for workers, students, visitors, and residents. Physical culture establishments will provide a recreational opportunity and amenity for workers and local residents. And distilleries, which currently exist at Industry City already, under the proposed rezoning, existing distilleries would be non-conforming and new distilleries would not be permitted, but the applicant seeks to allow existing distilleries to expand and new distilleries to be permitted. So again, the proposed development seeks flexibility in the range of uses that would be permitted, as well as the locations of uses over time. So retail and hotel uses would be restricted to specific locations within the project area, but all other uses would be permitted to locate throughout. Retail uses are intended to be a secondary use within the project and would be limited to a total of 900,000 square feet, which represents 0.7 FAR. They would generally be restricted to the first and second floors to help activate the streetscape and create a pedestrian-friendly environment. Local retail is anticipated to be oriented along 3rd Avenue, closer to the existing Sunset Park residential community, and a 40,000 square foot per establishment cap would apply to retail along most of the 3rd Avenue frontage in order to guide retail development towards neighborhoods serving local retail. Destination retail is anticipated to locate in areas that could potentially accommodate larger footprints and are further away from the adjacent residential community. For example, along 2nd Avenue, along the 2nd Avenue frontage of the Finger buildings, and along 39th Street between 1st and 2nd Avenue. In these locations, retail would be permitted to locate in the 1st and 2nd floors without a per establishment restriction. While the proposed community facility uses, specifically colleges and universities and libraries and museums and non-commercial art galleries, would not be restricted to specific locations within the project area, they would be capped at a total square footage of 625,000 square feet, which is approximately 0.5 FAR. Up to 2 hotels would be permitted, each of which, again, would be restricted to specific locations. There would be 1 hotel located within each building cluster. Both hotels could equal up to a maximum of 287,000 square feet. The existing buildings in both of the building clusters are proposed to remain as is. While there are no expansions contemplated at this time, the proposed development would allow for the flexibility of vertical expansions that are limited in height depending on the future needs of the tenants. And I'll show some diagrams of that flexibility later, but in general, this would allow 25 feet of additional height on top of the Finger buildings and 35 feet of additional height on top of the 39th Street buildings. In addition to the existing buildings, there are 3 new buildings being proposed. 2 new buildings would be located in the Finger buildings, and 1 located in the 39th Street buildings. So this is the location shown in red below of the new building 11, which would be an L-shaped building on block 679, lot 1, with frontage along 2nd Avenue and 32nd Street. It would contain approximately 495,000 square feet of floor area. The portion of the building fronting on 2nd Avenue would contain 13 stories and rise to 170 feet in height. The portion of the building fronting on 32nd Street would contain 5 stories. The new Gateway building would be located on 3rd Avenue between 36th and 37th Street. And this is a rendering of that building from the vantage point of the BQE. The Gateway building would rise to 12 stories and 170 feet in height and would occupy approximately 182,000 square feet. There would be one hotel in this building of approximately 160,000 square feet and 223 rooms. And both the Gateway building and Building 11 would form anchor points at the northwest and southeast corners of the finger buildings that would mimic the bulk of the existing Building 10, which again rises to 170 feet sheer without a setback. New Building 21 would be located between Buildings 19 and 20 and 1st Avenue. It would contain 10 stories and would rise to 150 feet in height, including approximately 781,000 square feet of floor area. One hotel would be located in this building with up to a maximum of 127,000 square feet and 197 rooms. So this is a diagram showing kind of all of the buildings in the proposed development, including where uses are anticipated to be located. So retail uses are shown in red, and as you can see, they are restricted to the 1st and 2nd floors throughout. There are 2 hotel uses that I described. Those are shaded in the dark purple. You can see them in the Gateway building and New Building 21. In green, at the 39th Street building, that is the Brooklyn Nets facility, which is a training facility that exists today and would remain. One or more college and university uses, which are shown in blue in the finger buildings, they're contemplated to be located in New Building 11 and a portion of Building 9, as it is anticipated that those uses would likely desire some new purpose-built space. And all other uses, including non-retail commercial uses, such as office, as well as manufacturing, studios, all of those uses kind of are shown in light purple and are envisioned to be located on the upper floors of buildings throughout. Parking is shown in gray and would be accommodated primarily within 2 parking garages, with 1 garage sited in each of the 2 building clusters in order to distribute vehicular activity and serve tenants and visitors to all of the buildings. These garages are proposed to be located in Building 11 and Building 21. So this is a diagram of a plan view of the finger buildings showing the location of, the anticipated location of one of those parking facilities, as well as the flow of pedestrians and vehicular users. So the pedestrian entrances are all shown in the red arrows. The parking facility is shaded in red. Again, it's in Building 11, and it is anticipated to include between 334 and 384 parking spaces. These spaces would be located on the 3rd, 4th, and 5th floors. Vehicular access to the parking facility would be provided from 32nd Street, closer to 3rd Avenue. So elevated walkways would be constructed along 33rd Street, similar to those that have already been constructed along 34th, 35th, and 36th Street to improve the circulation. And in order to minimize conflicts between pedestrian and vehicular traffic, the new curb cuts would be limited. So new curb cuts could be introduced to allow for vehicular access and loading, but they would be limited in certain areas, and those areas are the ones that are shown in purple, circled here. This is shaded in red. You can see New Building 21. The parking facility located in this building is anticipated to include between 1,350 and 1,600 parking spaces that would be located on the cellar level, as well as the 3rd, 4th, and 5th floors. Vehicular access to this parking structure would be provided from 1st Avenue as well as 41st Street. And vehicular access generally is intended to be shifted off of 39th Street in favor of 41st Street and 1st Avenue, which would allow 39th Street to operate as a pedestrian-oriented street. 41st and 1st Avenues are intended to serve as primary loading and service streets. The loading docks are shown in orange. And again, the locations where new curb cuts could be introduced would be limited to the areas shown in purple here. In terms of the proposed actions, the applicant is seeking a zoning text amendment to establish a new special district in the zoning resolution. The new special district would create a new special permit that would modify use, bulk, and other requirements within the special district. A zoning map amendment would map the new special district and would change an M31 district to an M24 district. And a special permit to modify use, bulk, and other requirements within the newly created special district, and a city map change to demap a street. So in terms of the first action, the text amendment creating the new special district, the new special district would establish new use regulations, and it would create a new CPC special permit that would modify use and bulk regulations. So first I'll speak to the use regulations that would be applicable within the special district. M1 performance standards would apply. So currently, the majority of the project area is proposed to be rezoned to an M2 district, which would impose M2 performance standards. However, the special district would impose M1 performance standards throughout the area, which are more stringent. And also, unenclosed sidewalk cafes would be permitted throughout the special district. The text amendment would also create a new special permit that would allow the CPC to modify use and bulk regulations, subject to findings and a site plan. So there are a number of uses that could be permitted through this special permit, which are not otherwise permitted in the underlying zoning districts. These include schools with no living or sleeping accommodations, colleges and universities, libraries, museums, and non-commercial art galleries. And for those two, the colleges and universities and libraries, museums, and non-commercial art galleries, those two uses together would be capped at a maximum of 625,000 square feet, or 0.5 FAR approximately. Hotels could be permitted, physical culture establishments, which would otherwise require a BSA special permit, and distilleries. Distilleries are only allowed as of right in M3 districts. However, this proposal would allow distilleries to locate outside of M3 districts, subject to FDNY approval for compliance with the fire code. And lastly, all retail and service uses would be permitted, regardless of whether or not they're allowed as of right in the underlying district, and I'll elaborate more on exactly what this means. So the use groups that are listed on this slide, so 6A, 6C, 7B, 8B, 9A, 10A, 12B, and 14A, these are all of the use groups that are categorized as retail and service establishments in the zoning resolution. Among these, 7B, 8B, and 14A, they are, all of these use groups are permitted as of right today and would continue to be permitted as of right with the proposed rezoning. However, for the other use groups, which are 6A, 6C, 9A, 10A, and 12B, some of the specific uses within those use groups are permitted as of right, and some are not permitted as of right. And so here is a table that shows those specific use groups that kind of have a mixed bag in terms of specific uses that are permitted as of right and those aren't. And so this table is not exhaustive. It doesn't list every single use within these use groups and categorize them in the two buckets, but it lists many of them and kind of shows examples. So generally speaking, what is notable is that many kinds of retail establishments that are greater than 10,000 square foot in size are generally not allowed as of right, but they would be permitted via this special permit. So all retail and service uses, the as-of-right uses as well as the non-as-of-right uses that would be permitted by the special permit, would be subject to a cap of 900,000 square feet, which is approximately 0.7 FAR. Also, all of those uses would, above 120,000 square feet, would trigger a parking requirement of 1 space per 500 square feet. And one thing to note about that parking requirement is it would be triggered not only by new buildings that are constructed or new floor area, such as an expansion of an existing building, it would also be triggered by the conversion of existing floor area to a retail use. In terms of bulk, the special permit would allow for modifications of all underlying bulk regulations other than floor area ratio. The second action the applicant is seeking is a zoning map amendment that would map the newly created special district on 22 lots, would change an M31 district to an M24 district on 15 lots to better reflect the built form and uses that exist in that area today. M24 districts permit an FAR of 5.0 for all permitted manufacturing and commercial uses and have a more stringent set of performance standards than the existing M31 district. Height and setback regulations permit a maximum base height before a required setback of the lesser of 85 feet or 6 stories, with an overall height governed by a sky exposure plane. Parking is not required. In terms of the third action, which is the special permit, before I outline the use and bulk relief that the applicant is seeking through the special permit, I want to clarify that the special permit being requested contains multiple development scenarios. Because the applicant seeks to acquire additional properties to be included in the proposed development beyond the existing Industry City complex, there are a total of 4 development scenarios as part of this application, each with its own set of findings and a site plan. So these are referred to as large-scale development assemblages A, B, C, and D. Large-scale development assemblage A includes only those properties that the applicant currently owns where the existing Industry City complex is located today, and so that's the extent of the areas shaded in gray. Large-scale development assemblage D represents the applicant's full vision for the proposed development, and this includes all of the properties that the applicant intends to acquire and incorporate into the proposed development in the future. Because the applicant does not have a clear timeline for the acquisition of those properties, 2 additional proposed development scenarios account for only one of the 2 parcels being acquired. So large-scale development assemblage B includes the extent of assemblage A plus the gateway parcel, and large-scale development assemblage C includes the extent of A plus the building 21 parcel. The differences between the development scenarios in terms of lot area, proposed and permitted square footage and floor area ratio, and the projected breakdown of uses is shown in this table. In total, the permitted square footage would range from 6.4 to 6.6 million square feet. So in terms of how this would work, if the proposed actions are approved, large-scale development assemblage A would be in effect. If and when additional properties are acquired in the future, the applicant would have to prove ownership of those parcels and seek a chairperson certification regarding that ownership. And at the time that the chair certification is issued, large-scale development assemblage B, C, or D, depending on whatever parcels have been acquired, would then replace large-scale development assemblage A. So in order to obtain a building permit on any property that the applicant did not own at the time that they applied for the special permit, they would have to provide the Department of Buildings with the chairperson certification that confirms the ownership of those parcels. So the special permit that the applicant is seeking would modify underlying use and bulk regulations of the following sections of the zoning resolution. So first, I'll describe the use modifications that are being requested. The applicant is seeking to allow the following uses to be permitted: colleges and universities, libraries, museums, and non-commercial art galleries, hotels, retail and service uses, all retail and service uses in use groups 6A, 6C, 9A, 10A, and 12B, physical cultural establishments, and distilleries. Again, so distilleries, I kind of explained it a little bit before, but just to be clear, distilleries in general, they wouldn't be permitted due to performance standards that regulate flammable materials. So rather than having the zoning govern distilleries, they would be permitted pursuant to FDNY approval. And while the special permit could allow for a school use, the applicant is not applying for a school use at this time. However, the option would exist for that use to be applied for in the future. So one thing to note about these newly permitted uses is that if a special permit is approved, there would be restrictions that would govern the co-location of some of these uses with others to kind of mitigate potential conflicts. So specifically, colleges and universities, libraries, museums, and non-commercial art galleries and hotels would be restricted from co-locating with either any use group 18 use or heavier commercial and manufacturing uses if they release emissions that would have a measurable effect on the surrounding uses, or if those uses store hazardous materials above certain quantities. And this provision that separates some of the lighter uses from the heavier uses is modeled off of the provision that separates residential from heavier commercial and manufacturing uses in the MX district regulations. And one other provision of the special permit affects kind of the vesting, essentially. So once a certificate of occupancy is issued for any of these uses listed here, any use that's basically only permitted through the special permit, that would constitute vesting with regards to the special permit. So typically, vesting occurs with substantial construction, which typically means a new building is built. If after 4 years that hasn't happened, a special permit lapses. However, in this case, because the project area consists of buildings, primarily the area is already built out, the buildings are already there, the floor area already exists, and the new buildings are contingent upon the acquisition of property that's uncertain with regards to timing. The applicant wouldn't have to build a new building in order to vest. If any existing floor area is converted to any of the uses listed here, vesting would also occur. So a couple of more detailed points that I want to explain that also relate to the retail use and the parking requirement specifically. So while the parking requirement is tied to the retail use at a rate of a requirement of 1 space per 500 square feet, the parking spaces are intended to be shared amongst all of the uses at the entire Industry City complex. So it's a shared parking scheme due to the varying peak hours of the different uses. So for example, the peak hours for office uses, manufacturing uses, is anticipated to be during the weekdays, where the peak hours of retail uses, for example, would be anticipated during evenings and weekends. Also, the applicant would have the flexibility to build an accessory group parking facility of up to 500 spaces. Normally, you can only build a facility of up to 225 spaces, but this increased capacity is meant to allow for the construction of a parking garage before all of the parking spaces in that garage are actually required. So because the parking requirement is envisioned to be slowly triggered over time, for example, as existing floor areas converted to retail use, but the applicant has stated there's no feasible way to slowly construct a parking structure. So this would allow for a parking structure to be built at one time, and in the beginning, many of those spaces would be permitted rather than required, but over time, those permitted spaces would turn into required spaces. So there are a set of general findings that apply to all use modifications, and there are also a specific set of findings that applies specifically to the community facility uses and hotel uses. These findings were drawn from and based on existing findings that are standard in other types of special permits that allow for similar use modifications. And the applicant's responses to these findings can be found in your briefing package. So now I'll speak to the bulk modifications that are being sought by the special permit. So while the overall floor area ratio of the proposed development would be limited by the underlying zoning districts, bulk modifications would permit floor area to be transferred across zoning lot lines. So in this case, there are 4 zoning lots within the proposed development. That floor area would be subject to contextual envelopes that relate to the built form of the existing historic buildings, but would also allow for future enlargements of existing buildings, as well as allowing for new buildings to be constructed as described earlier. So you can see the zoning envelopes for the finger buildings are shown here. So the existing buildings are shown in gray. The boundaries of the zoning envelopes are shown in the solid black lines. And these envelopes would generally allow the finger buildings, again, to expand up to 25 feet above their existing roof heights after a setback. So you can see that the areas that are shaded in yellow, these represent the areas where new floor area would be permitted, where it doesn't currently exist today. The 2 exceptions to that bulk that I just described are, again, new buildings 11 and the Gateway building, which are both outlined in red. So those are, again, intended to mimic the built form of existing building 10, which rises to a height of 170 feet without a setback. So this is the same diagram, except for the assemblages that do not include the Gateway parcel. So this is the contextual envelope for the 39th Street buildings. So in this case, assemblages C and D, they include the entirety of the Building 21 parcel. So again, these would generally allow the existing buildings to expand 35 feet above the existing roof heights, and that would up to a maximum of 150 feet after a required setback. And again, the areas shown in yellow are where new floor area would be permitted. That does not exist today. And you can see new building 21, which is outlined in red. So again, this is the same diagram for assemblages A and B, which don't account for the acquisition of lot 20. The zoning envelopes that were just shown would require relief from yard regulations as well as height and setback regulations in certain areas. So this relief is being sought either to bring existing buildings into compliance as they encroach into the required yards or into the required setbacks or sky exposure planes. And this relief would also allow for vertical expansions of existing buildings, or would allow for new buildings that mimic the built form of the existing buildings as I described earlier. So here is a diagram that shows the location of the requested bulk waivers for the finger buildings. This is assemblages A and C, which don't include the gateway building. So in purple are the yard waivers. This is where existing buildings 1, 2, and 3 encroach into the rear yard. Height and setback waivers are shown in yellow, and so these are the areas where existing buildings would either be brought into compliance or where new floor area, either through vertical expansions or through new buildings, would require relief from the setback or sky exposure plane requirements. So here is the same diagram for B and D, which includes the gateway parcel. And here are some images showing some of those height and setback waivers in section. So on the left is a section through finger buildings 1 and 2. The areas that are shaded in yellow are the areas of relief. They're kind of hard to see in the image on the left, but they're on the kind of upper portions. And to explain these sections a little bit, there are 2 kind of parallel lines along the top. The topmost line is the maximum height of MEP equipment above the roof of the building, and then the lower line is the maximum height of the building itself. So on the right is a section through the proposed new building 11, and you can see where shaded in yellow portions of that building would encroach into the setback and/or sky exposure plane requirements. So here's a diagram that shows the location of the requested bulk modifications for the 39th Street buildings. And again, the yard waivers are shown in purple. The water-facing portion of building 26 currently encroaches into the rear yard. And relief from yard regulations along the boundaries of Lot 20 would allow new building 21 to encroach into portions of that rear yard. Height and setback waivers are shown in yellow. As the existing 39th Street buildings, they encroach into the required setback and sky exposure plane. So this relief would bring the existing buildings into conformance and allow for those vertical expansions that I described. This would also allow new building 21 to have the same base height, setbacks, and maximum building height as the other buildings. So here's the same diagram for assemblages C and D. And here is a diagram showing kind of the height and setback waivers, for example, through buildings 1920 in section. So there are a number of findings for bulk modifications that relate to the streetscape, existing buildings, character, access to light and air, and distribution of bulk. These findings were drawn from and based off of existing findings that are standard in other types of special permits that allow for bulk modifications, and the applicant's responses can be found in your briefing package. The fourth action is a city map change, which would eliminate 40th Street between 1st and 2nd Avenues. That area is shown in the dotted blue line. This section of the street is unbuilt, has never been in use as a street, and portions of buildings have been constructed within the bed of this portion of the street for over a century. An EIS was conducted, and a notice of completion for the draft environmental impact statement was issued on October 25th. Significant adverse impacts were identified with respect to historic and cultural resources, transportation, air quality, noise, and construction. Mitigation measures are identified in the draft environmental impact statement and will be explored further in the final environmental impact statement. In summary, the applicant is seeking a zoning text amendment, a zoning map amendment, a special permit, and a city map change to facilitate a mixed-use development comprised of up to 6.6 million square feet of industrial, commercial, and community facility uses in Sunset Park, Brooklyn, Community District 7. I'm happy to take any questions.
That was quite a tour de force, Connie. Thank you. Commissioner Capelli.
Could you repeat that? How much, by the way, that was very impressive. How much transportation supplementation do we envision happening with this?
What do you mean by
Aside and
supplementation?
apart from the parking spaces that you're going to provide, are there public transportation options being explored, and is there a commitment from the city to maybe do fast ferries, or from the MTA to perhaps do some additional bus routes there? Or?
So in terms of the DEIS, so a couple of, let me go back to the slide here, a little bit more information, which may or may not directly answer your question, but in terms of the impacts identified with respect to transportation, so some more information about that. So There were 41 intersections analyzed, and up to 22 would experience significant adverse impacts in at least one peak period, and up to 11 of those would be fully mitigated, and up to 14 would remain unmitigated. And these are kind of high-level overviews. We can provide additional information about that. In terms of transit, there are 3 subway station elements that would result in significant adverse impacts, and mitigation would require long-term capital improvements, such as widening of stairways, which would require feasibility and practicability engineering studies. So mitigation will be finalized in the FEIS in consultation with the New York City Transit. In terms of bus transit, a capacity shortfall would result in impacts to the westbound B70 during the weekday AM peak hour, but that could be fully mitigated with an additional bus. But New York City Transit is going to provide additional bus service where demand warrants, as what we understand. In terms of the pedestrian impacts, there were 77 pedestrian elements, and up to 18 would result in impacts. And so up to 5 of those could be fully mitigated with things like crosswalk and sidewalk widenings, and up to 3 sidewalks, 8 crosswalks, and 2 corners would remain unmitigated.
It just seems to me that you're bringing essentially Sunset Park complete to the waterfront here, and it would be an opportunity for the community to be able to perhaps get ferry service from there as part of this, which would both service this development, but would also service the community at large. And you could run from there to downtown Brooklyn to Manhattan.
58th Street, the ferry stop at 58th Street currently, which isn't too far away.
No, that's 30 blocks away, isn't it?
20
blocks.
I'll note 2 things. One is that currently Industry City runs a shuttle bus every 10 minutes up to the closest subway station. The other is that working with the Design Trust for Public Space, they did an Under the L pilot project in which they sought to improve the experience of walking underneath the Gowanus. And they did it with painting, with uplighting, with a sculptural piece that captures stormwater runoff and feeds plantings. It's still a highway overhead, but it does make a difference in the experience of crossing over into Industry City. Chair Knuckles.
Thank you. I just wanted to be clear on the FAR. The M2, proposed M2 has an FAR of 4.
Of 5, a maximum
Well, 5.
FAR 5, but just to clarify, the majority of the project area would be rezoned to M24.
Right.
There's a very small portion of the project area that is M12, and that would be left alone. That's not proposed to be touched, which has a lower FAR.
Okay.
But overall, the effective FAR, the maximum FAR that could be achieved would be 4.97, essentially 5.
Right, thank you.
Commissioner Delausse.
I have a whole series of questions. Connie, I just want to say, picking up on what my fellow commissioners said, I didn't know that the marathon was today. I thought it was coming on Sunday in terms of your presentation. So, this project has obviously had a number of impacts on the community already. Some are positive, some are negative. And so I think I have a number of questions when this comes back to make sure that the applicant really drills down on. And one, I think specifically for DCP, I'm wondering, have we ever had an application quite like this that has this significant, a private application that brings 1 million square feet of primarily manufacturing, but not exclusively manufacturing, obviously, uses? It would be helpful to kind of get a history of projects that are similar in scope or size, if they exist, because I think that would be helpful, kind of putting this project in context to conversations that have happened across the city. Again, the presentation was very, very thorough. I appreciate that. There's a couple times on your PowerPoint where you had a matrix up, kind of showing one where you showed the percent of usage broadly, and I think there were 2 columns, and then the one with, broadly speaking, with all of the square footage and things like that. One thing that would be really helpful when that comes back, one is, I think, to break out the manufacturing artisanal uses in more detail, because I think that's going to be an area of conversation.
Meaning within manufacturing, within artisanal, like what?
Exactly. What kinds of uses within those 2 areas exist? And then it would be helpful to know currently the number of jobs that are attached to the different uses, and then to the extent that the applicant knows what the wages are for those jobs and what basically the educational or skill background is. Because I think, a big part of the rationale for considering an application of this size is the employment and what kind of employment it brings and for whom and to whom. And so to the extent that we know what the snapshot looks like now and what the anticipated snapshot might be based on the kinds of uses they are seeking, that would be really helpful.
I think the one that we can answer now is that the 25% vacant space is providing no jobs.
Obvious. No, I'm clear. Listen, I remember when the vacancy rate was much, much higher here. I mean, when it was probably over 70% vacant. So there's been a significant change. I'm sure when we come back, we're going to hear about the phasing in construction. Obviously, it's a really significant project. Also, potential impacts to the BQE. Given the proximity to the BQE. It would be, you mentioned this, the active rail line on First Avenue. I personally have never seen a rail use on that, even though I know it's active. So it would be helpful to know, like, what does it mean to be an active rail line? And when is the last time it was actually used and by whom?
Just a quick note on that. We can get more information. I have also never seen that active rail line, even though I've tried. I understand that it's I think it's like a couple of times a week at most. So it happens, I hear. I don't think it's that frequent, but we can ask for more information.
Okay, that'd be helpful. And then the Innovation Lab, you highlighted that, like the total square footage of that and the level of commitment to maintain that use. You mentioned the gateway parcel and the limited number of residential uses that are connected to that, not owned by Industry City. It'd be helpful to know what the rents are, the number of families, AMI levels, to the extent we have that. I think you pretty much touched on the rationale for 1,600 parking spaces in Building 21, but I think that could be unpacked further.
I think the parking that is being provided as part of the proposed development was kind of part of the analysis that was done as part of the EIS to kind of what would serve all of these uses. And so that number has kind of been apportioned within those garages.
I guess part of the question I have is, obviously they don't have that many parking spaces now based on the currently active square footage. So I'm just wondering if we shouldn't be thinking about another ratio. Again, I'm not sure what the appropriate ratio is, but obviously, what's the ratio now, and what would the ratio be in the future? And can we get to something that's less than 1,600 parking spaces? Coming back, when we talk about the different performance standards for M1 versus M2 would be helpful. More information about who enforces the separation of the heavier versus lighter uses. I mean, you touched that a bit.
Yeah, so just basically, as I mentioned, it's kind of modeled off of the existing MX provisions, and what happens is that, in this case, the lighter uses, so the academic uses, the libraries, museums, non-commercial art galleries, the hotels, essentially when they go to, for example, pull permits for that use, they have to have, I think it's like a registered engineer or an architect, basically certify that there are no other uses. The co-location specifically means that you can't share a building with these other heavier uses or share a wall with these other uses. And so an architect or an engineer has to certify that that building or another building or that shares a wall doesn't contain one of those uses that meets those requirements about hazardous materials and emissions. And so basically, it's the same regulatory structure that exists in the MX regulations for how that would actually work.
Okay. I mean, I guess to the extent that we know of any issues with how that's currently functioning, it would be helpful to know that as part of when it comes back. And then only three more. Obviously details about Industry City's status of acquiring the parcels identified. Obviously details about the intended college educational use partners. And then details about the planned roadway traffic and pedestrian safety improvements. I'm aware of the pilot project that was done underneath the BQE, in the end, it's dangerous, and there've been a number of fatalities, and that many more people crossing the street is something we should all be concerned about. So wanting to hear more about that.
Okay.
And then, you know, I'm sure when they come back, they're going to give us examples, I hope, of other innovation economy projects in the United States and the components that they thought made those projects successful and why or why not those components are part of this project. Thank you.
Okay.
Commissioner Knight.
Just picking up on the questions that Commissioner De La Hoz asked, you said that building parcel number 21 had an operating business?
That's right.
So when it comes back, I'd like to know what the plans are for relocation of that business.
Okay. So that business, it's a manufacturer of plastic products, and just something to note is that it's an owner-occupied business, so they're not a tenant of that property, but we can ask that question.
Commissioner Levin.
I'd like to thank Commissioner De La Hoz for asking most of the things I was going to ask about, so, or at least to reinforce some of her questions. She's not the only one who's curious about some of those elements. I think in particular, the kinds of jobs that are anticipated and a breakdown of the wages and skill levels that are going to be required, because there's desirable economic consequences to the project as a whole for the city, but I think we also have to be very mindful of the situation of the current neighborhood and the extent that we are expanding job opportunities in that neighborhood is going to be very influential. When it comes back, I'm interested in knowing more about all of the partners involved here. There's mention of colleges and universities, but also libraries, museums, et cetera. What's really the plan, or what examples of the kinds of real uses we might see, not just zoning categories of uses. And then I have two questions about city planning's work in framing this up. As I was reading through all of this, it seemed to me a lot of this could have been laid out in special district regulations. I'm not sure I totally understand the relationship between the special permit and the zoning text that allows all this stuff to happen. As I read the elements of the requested special permit, it seemed to include just about everything that has been described for the various development scenarios. So, what is it anticipated that there would be future special permit applications? Is this, or if this is the only special permit that's going to be needed, why isn't it just in the zoning text?
Yeah, I think we can come back with a more detailed response, but in general, this is the only application that would be possible in this area. It's kind of a unique condition. This area's almost fully built out already. It's already owned by one operator. No one else would even be eligible to apply because of the size of the parcels that are owned aren't large enough to apply. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, okay, because I'm thinking of other areas where we were anticipating substantial new development and wanting to craft it quite particularly, and those have sometimes just been done through, like the Special Hudson Yards District or the Special West Chelsea District. Those both had all the rules and regulations laid out in the zoning text, no further special permit required, but I'm sure there's a good answer to that.
Okay.
And then finally, I'm curious to know whether there's been any conversation with the applicant about sustainability features that might be, environmental sustainability features that might be required here. I mean, obviously, repurposing significant amount of existing building is like thing number one for sustainability, but I'm wondering about energy standards and daylight. Well, it's got a lot of daylight with all those windows anyway, but the whole list of things that one could do in these buildings to make them as efficient as possible.
We haven't had that, but we can ask about that certainly when this comes back.
Commissioner Burney.
I was just looking at your slide 85, is that right? 85. And I may just have a problem with the language, but is this, you've got three, under findings, you've got 3 bullet points there. And are you saying that the proposal meets these standards? In other words, or it
So
doesn't, or?
the applicant has, as part of their application for each of the 4 special permit development scenarios, has responded to a set of findings. And so they're making argument as to why they kind of meet each one of them, and kind of all of the details are available for review. So that's their kind of.
I would note that per Commissioner Levin's question earlier, that absent a special permit, there would be none of these findings. So that is one of the reasons why I think that the borough office and others sort of did it this way, but I think we'll have a more detailed answer further on.
I didn't understand that, but anyway. But my question simply is, if you're adding bulk, particularly in the case of 33rd to 36th Street, which are very narrow, how can you find that you're not restricting access of light and air, you're not obstructing access of light on the block? I mean, you must be doing all of those things, right?
So the findings for all 4 of the scenarios, they're included in your briefing packages, so you can kind of actually read through the detailed responses to each one of those findings and how they addressed each of those sections.
Okay, so back to my homework. And the other question was, somebody mentioned the 25% vacancy. So it seems like we're adding 1 million square feet and we already have 25% vacant. I mean,
The building's in disrepair.
So the buildings are in various different shapes of
which is why they're
repair.
vacant. They just haven't
That's
been.
right. Some of them, like towards the waterfront, buildings 24 and 25, are particularly in poor shape. I understand them to be like they're uninhabitable at this point,
Right.
where other buildings have had more capital investment and are more utilized. And so I think that vacancy,
Yeah, because I'd heard there was a waiting list, and I thought, how can there be 25% vacancy in a waiting list? But that explains it. Thank you.
And just actually, Commissioner Burney, would diagrams specific to the areas that you were with the narrower streets, we could put those in when we come back, I think. Just, I think they exist, we can just.
Yeah. And one
pinpoint
thing,
them.
just to clarify, I think I covered it, but in case it wasn't, I'll go back to a diagram, just related to your point about narrow streets in the finger buildings specifically. I'm gonna go back to the area map, which is, I don't think there's a pointer here, is there? Oh, there is a pointer here. So again, these kind of, you see these white cutouts? That's the extent of the mapped streets. So these areas, which, if you're there, they look and feel like streets, but they're not mapped streets at all. That's just private property. So so that's just a distinction to note, but understood kind of your question.
Other questions? Okay, then Connie, after an hour and 20 minutes, you're off the hook. The application is certified. Thank you.
Okay. The second item on the agenda, page 151, is a certification of a zoning map amendment in Brooklyn Community District 2. Our presenter is Sarit Platkin.
Good afternoon. This is a private application by All West Old Fulton LLC for a zoning map amendment to rezone the project area from M21 to M15 to facilitate the development of a 5-story commercial building with retail on the cellar first and second floors and offices on the 3rd through 5th floors in Fulton Ferry, Brooklyn Community District 2. The project area is located in the Fulton Ferry neighborhood, a triangular area bordered by the Brooklyn Bridge and Dumbo to the north, the Brooklyn-Queens Expressway and Brooklyn Heights to the south, and the East River and Brooklyn Bridge Park to the west. The surrounding area consists of a mix of residential, commercial, and industrial uses, as well as a large amount of public open space located under the Brooklyn Bridge and the Brooklyn-Queens Expressway. Dumbo, a mixed-use residential and commercial area just north of the project area, has emerged as a premier job center for technology startups in recent years. Large 8 to 15-story commercial and mixed-use converted loft buildings are typical in Dumbo and south of the project area in Fulton Ferry. On the south side of Old Fulton Street, adjacent to the project area, there is a landmark building, the Eagle Street Warehouse and Storage Company, a 9-story former manufacturing loft building that was converted to residential use in 1980. A recent nearby commercial conversion includes Panorama, formerly the Watchtower buildings, on the 2 blocks just south of the project area across Doughty Street. These buildings once served as a headquarters for the Jehovah's Witnesses and are now being converted to 635,000 square feet of office space, 35,000 square feet of retail space, and 15,000 square feet of hospitality uses. The project area is within an M21 district that extends from the Brooklyn Bridge south to Red Hook, Brooklyn. Historically, light manufacturing zones extended to the north into Dumbo as well. 2 land use actions rezoned significant portions of Dumbo from manufacturing to mixed-use districts in the late 1990s and early 2000s. While the project area does not have a historic district designation, it is located at the nexus of 3 historic districts: the Brooklyn Heights Historic District to the south, the Fulton Ferry Historic District to the northwest, and the Dumbo Historic District to the north. The project area is located approximately 4 blocks from the High Street Brooklyn Bridge A and C station and a ½ mile from the Clark Street 2 and 3 station and the York Street F station. The project area is also served by the B25 bus, which runs along Old Fulton Street, City Bike, which has stations on Old Fulton Street across from the project area, and the East River Ferry, which departs from Fulton Ferry Landing 1 block west of the project area. The project area is well served by open space, including Brooklyn Bridge Park to the west, Hillside Park, Squibb Park, and Harry Chapin Playground to the south, and Anchorage Plaza and Cadman Plaza to the east. The typical built form in the immediately surrounding area consists of 4-story residential buildings with ground floor retail on the north side of Old Fulton Street and 4 to 9-story residential buildings, 1-story auto body shops, including the project site, which you can see on the left in the top left photo with the purple awning, and parking lots on the south side of Old Fulton Street. As mentioned previously, larger 8 to 15-story commercial loft buildings are typical of the south side of Old Fulton Street, just west of the project area. Also zoned M21, the north side of Old Fulton Street has active ground floor uses and public spaces, including a public plaza, Old Fulton Plaza, which you can see in the top right photo. Oh, sorry, back. As a key pedestrian corridor connecting the main entrance of the 85-acre Brooklyn Bridge Park and Fulton Ferry Landing to transit, Old Fulton Street has become an increasingly active retail and tourism destination with restaurants and cafes lining the north side of the street, as well as Fulton Ferry Landing, 1 block west of the project area. The project area is generally bounded by Old Fulton Street to the north, Hicks Street to the east, and Doughty Street to the south. 50 Old Fulton Street, the development site, includes an irregularly shaped 6,600 square foot through lot, improved with a 1-story, approximately 6,600 square foot auto body shop, which has been used as an auto body shop since the late 1960s. 58 Old Fulton Street, the corner site, includes a 700 square foot lot improved with a 1 to 2-story, approximately 3,700 square foot building, which is also an auto body shop. 46 Old Fulton Street, a lot partially included in the project area, is a 4,600 square foot lot improved with a 4-story, approximately 16,000 square foot warehouse, and it is also the forthcoming location of the eating and drinking establishment, L&B Spumoni Gardens. The project area also includes a small triangular area south of the BQE at the intersection of Poplar and Hicks Street. This triangular area includes the Poplar Street Community Garden, a 1,900 square foot green thumb garden, which is part of the MAP street and would therefore be unaffected by the zoning change. All West Old Fulton is proposing a 5-story, 85-foot tall building that would include approximately 33,000 square feet of retail space on the cellar, ground, and second floors, and office space on the 3rd through 5th floors. The applicant is targeting creative users such as technology, startup, advertising, and design firms, as well as office tenants. The proposed commercial and retail uses would be consistent with the active uses seen on the north side of Old Fulton Street and nearby in Dumbo and in Fulton Ferry. The new building's floor plates would be 6,600 square feet on each floor, resulting in 100% lot coverage. There would be no required accessory off-street parking or loading, and no parking or loading would be provided on the development site. The actions necessary to facilitate the project include a zoning map amendment to rezone the project area from an M21 to an M15 zoning district. M15 would be mapped between the south side of Old Fulton Street, the north side of Doughty Street, and the west side of Hicks Street to facilitate commercial and retail development. M15 is a moderate density light manufacturing district that allows 5.0 FAR of industrial and commercial uses and 6.5 FAR of community facility uses. The maximum base height in M15 districts is 85 feet or 6 stories, whichever is less, and the maximum building height is subject to a sky exposure plane.
Questions from the commission? Okay, the application is certified. Quite a difference from the prior one.
The third item on the agenda, page 169, is a certification of a UDAP and designation and disposition of city-owned property in Brooklyn Community District 8. Our presenter is Amy Jen.
Good afternoon. This is an application by the Department of Housing Preservation and Development, HPD, to request the designation and approval of an urban development action area and disposition of city-owned land. This application would facilitate the development of a new 8-story building with 44 affordable units at 1559 to 1563 Prospect Place. The development site is located in Weeksville, Brooklyn, Community District 8. The surrounding area is largely comprised of residential and institutional uses. A few local commercial establishments can be found along the avenues. The surrounding area, including the project area, are zoned R6. R6 is a non-contextual medium-density residential district that allows residential and community facility uses. Under the height factor option, residential developments have a maximum base height of 60 feet or 6 stories and no fixed height limit, with height controlled by a sky exposure plane. Under the quality housing option, residential developments have a maximum FAR of 2.2 with a maximum base height of 60 feet and building height of 70 feet. Developments containing affordable independent residences for seniors, heirs, have a maximum FAR of 3.9. Maximum base height for heirs buildings is 65 feet and maximum building height is 80 feet, which increases to 85 feet with a qualifying ground floor. The surrounding area is well served by public transportation and located within the transit zone. The Utica Avenue subway station for the 2, 3, and 4 has entrances a little over half a mile away on Eastern Parkway. The Ralph Avenue subway station for the AC has entrances a half mile away on Fulton Street. The area is served by the B15, B45, B65, and B47 buses. The development site is comprised of 3 interior lots, 90, 91, and 92, totaling 8,342 square feet with 75 feet of total frontage on Prospect Place, which is a 70-foot wide street. The block is bounded by Ralph Avenue to the east, Buffalo Avenue to the west, and St. Mark's Avenue to the north. Lot 91 and 92 received approval for the disposition of city-owned land in the 1980s, but the sites were never developed and have remained vacant under city ownership since. As you can see from this aerial, the surrounding area is characterized primarily by low to medium density residential buildings with a mix of 2 to 3 story row houses and 4-story multifamily apartment buildings. Additionally, the surrounding area includes local institutional, commercial, and public facility uses. Outlined here, number 1 is the Weeksville Heritage Center and the historic Hunterfly Road houses. 2 is the NYCHA Kingsborough campus, and 3 is the former St. Mary's Hospital, which is currently under construction, being converted into a nursing home. This is a view of the project area from Prospect Place. These are views of the properties adjacent to the project area. To the left is a 4-story mixed-use residential building with commercial use on the ground floor at 183 Buffalo Avenue. To the right is a 4-story residential building at 1583 Prospect Place. Both buildings rise to a height of 40 feet. This is a view looking directly across the street from the project area on Prospect Place. As you can see, there is a mix of 3 to 4-story residential buildings. The proposed development consists of the new construction of an 8-story building with a total of 44 units of affordable rental housing plus 1 superintendent's unit. Of the 44 dwelling units, 26 will be affordable independent residences for seniors units, and there will be units set aside for formerly homeless households. The proposed development is expected to contain a mix of studio, 1- and 2-bedroom rental units, 3,452 square feet of outdoor recreational and garden space, and a community room on the ground floor. Units will be designed to be fully accessible, and in senior units contain bathroom grab bars. The project includes an emergency power generator that addresses special concerns for seniors, and amenities are designed to encourage social interactions and opportunities for residents. No parking is proposed for this project. The building will be developed under quality housing regulations and would have a total residential floor area of approximately 31,807 zoning square feet and an FAR of 3.81 with a base height of 60 feet followed by a setback of 16 feet to rise to a maximum building height of 80 feet. This development is a part of HPD's neighborhood construction program. This program funds the new construction of infill affordable rental housing and selects sponsors through a request for qualifications process to purchase city-owned sites. The development team selected for this project are Beechwood Homes and Settlement Housing Fund. The architects are Edelman, Sultan, Knoxwood. In order to facilitate the proposed project, HPD is requesting a designation and approval of an urban development action area and disposition of city-owned land. Thank you.
Questions from the commission? Commissioner Levin.
Yes, Amy, the slide that shows the adjacent building to the left, the one that is at 183 Buffalo.
Yes.
Those aren't lot line windows, are they?
No, they are not.
So there's a little strip
Yes.
of...
There's a gap
there's a gap.
between that building and the proposed
And
building.
the gap belongs to the existing building?
Yes, it does.
Okay, so this proposed new building would be built up to its lot line?
Yes,
Leaving
correct.
that gap to protect? Okay.
Correct.
Thank you.
Commissioner Deleuze.
I'm just wondering on the design, if you could go back to the facade, are those really air conditioners that are expected to be
Yes.
through wall?
The air conditioners are provided by the developers.
Okay.
Yeah.
We can talk more when it comes back about that. Thanks.
Okay.
Especially the way they're protruding.
Commissioner Burney.
I'm just trying to understand that rendering. It's projecting beyond the
It is not.
street wall?
No.
It's not. It's a very strange drawing. So it
Yeah,
looks like
because of the gap between the building on the left and the proposed building, that sliver of the building that looks like it's protruding out is actually just the gap between the two
So is there a
buildings.
gap between this building and the next building then as well? Because it looks as though it's in front of that one too, doesn't it?
So the brown part of the proposed building, so the 8-story part that you see is a part of the proposed project as well, and it sets back slightly from the gray area.
So why does it do that? So I see. So when you get to the street wall further down the block, it's actually set back.
It's actually
from the
set
street
back,
wall.
yeah.
And is
very
there some
slightly.
reason why they're not being consistent with the street wall? Is there?
I can have HPD respond to that.
Okay. And is there some reason why in an entire street of brick facades, we can't have a brick facade?
I can get HPD to respond to that.
Thank you.
Other questions? Okay, then the application is certified.
Thank you.
Item 4 on our agenda, page 189, is a non-ULURP review of a zoning text amendment in Queens Community District 2. Commissioner Rompashot is recused on this item, and our presenter is Scott Solomon.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. 6411 QB Owner LLC requests a text amendment to map 2 mandatory inclusionary housing areas on 2 project areas located a half mile apart from each other in the Woodside and Maspeth neighborhoods in Queens Community District 2. The proposed text amendment is requested to facilitate the development of 2 new mixed-use developments on 2 corresponding development sites. resulting in a total of 218 dwelling units, of which approximately 56 to 65 would be subject to MIH, and also including ground floor retail on both sites. No other actions are being requested. The project areas were rezoned to R7X C23 in 2006, also including the borough's first voluntary inclusionary housing areas being designated. That was mapped coterminously with the R7X C23 district. Pre-MIH, pre-2016, there was no difference between the maximum floor area in R7X districts outside and within the IHDAs. Since MIH was enacted, developments in R7X districts that do not provide affordable housing within the existing voluntary IH districts were only permitted a maximum base FAR of 3.75 and a maximum of 5.0 when affordable housing was provided. When MIH is mapped in an RX7 district now, the corresponding FAR is 6.0, representing an approximate 60% increase in the floor area compared to the base of 3.75. In the surrounding areas, since IH was mapped, there have been 0 buildings currently constructed beyond the 3.75 FAR. 2018, 6902 Queens Boulevard rezoning was approved. I just want to point out on the land use map, it's just west of Project Area 2. I'll note an oversight in that the map here doesn't show the existing rezoned area. So just south here, excuse me, just west of the project area, south of Queens Boulevard, between 69th Street and 70th Street. It's now the R7X goes down all the way to 47th Avenue. So if I point on this screen right here is now R7X C23. That is the current zoning. I just want to establish that that is an oversight there. That development that was approved was is to result in 2 mixed-use buildings, resulting in 561 dwelling units. The surrounding area around Project Area 1 is characterized by a diverse mix of uses, including residential, mixed-use buildings with ground floor retail, hotels, motels, and non-conforming automotive uses. There's also lower density residential uses located to the north and south of Queens Boulevard, and the high-density residential developments along the southern portion of Queens Boulevard currently, again, only utilize the 3.75 base maximum FAR. The area surrounding Project Area 2 is similarly characterized as a diverse mix of uses, including a hotel, motel to the east, low-density residential, and non-conforming automotive uses. On the southwest corner of 70th Street and Queens Boulevard, just north of the 6902 project area, there's an 11-story building under construction that again only utilizes the 3.75 FAR. The project areas are well served by public transit. Development site 1 to the west within the Woodside neighborhood is within transit zone, quarter mile south of the 61st Street 7-line station. Project Area 2 outside the transit zone, within half mile of the Roosevelt Avenue station to the north with connections to the EFM, R, and E trains. There are several local and express buses that traverse along Queens Boulevard. Zooming into the Woodside neighborhood, Project Area 1 includes the block fronts on the northern side of Queens Boulevard between 64th Street and 65th Place, approximately 48,000 square feet. Development site 1 is vacant, was formerly a 2-story motel. It was demolished prior to this aerial photo being taken. Moving east is the 2-story motel, followed by a 9-story mixed-use building, and then a 3-story mixed-use building on the corner. Zooming down into the street level, looking northwest to development site 1, you see the vacant property surrounded by a construction fence with a bicycle lane to the left. Pivoting to the right, looking at the balance of the project area, it's 2-story motel followed by the 2 mixed-use buildings. Looking south from the R4 district to the north, looking towards Queens Boulevard with a higher density south of Queens Boulevard. Looking at that same assemblage of properties from the northeast looking southwest. Again, these properties here, mixed-use developments, all utilizing no more than 3.75 FAR. Moving east to the Maspeth neighborhood, Project Area 2. includes the block fronts between 70th Street and 73rd Street on the southern side of Queens Boulevard, totaling approximately 91,000 square feet, including moving from east to west, first the development site, a one-story auto sales and livery leasing company, a auto supply shop, moving across to 72nd Street, across 72nd Street, a vacant, formerly Entenmann's factory with service parking lot, a new 11-story mixed-use building, again, built only to the 3.75 FAR, a former auto sales lot, another auto repair shop, and then from the northwest corner of 70th Street and Queens Boulevard, a two-story residence, then two two-story mixed-use buildings, a detached three-family residential building, and then a one-story warehouse. Looking at development site 1 on the left, looking at development site from 72nd Street looking east. Photo 7 looking at project area from 47th Avenue looking north with the rear of the 11-story mixed-use building. Looking at the same building from Queens Boulevard, the front portion. In terms of proposed development, development site 1 is a proposed 13-story mixed-use building consisting of 140 dwelling units, 1,600 square feet of ground floor retail space, and 75 permitted parking spaces accessory to residential and retail uses. 35 to 42 of the dwelling units would be required to be permanently affordable. The site is within the transit zone, reducing parking requirements. However, the applicant is providing more than required parking spaces. The building would have a residential FAR of 5.92, 0.08 FAR, commercial FAR maxing out at the 6.0 FAR. It would have a building height topping at 135 feet. Development site 2 is a proposed 12-story mixed-use building consisting of 78 dwelling units, 5,400 ground floor retail space, and 32 required parking spaces. The site is not within a transit zone again. 20 to 23 of the dwelling units would be subject to MIH. Development site 2 would have a maximum height of 125 feet, residential FAR 5.51, commercial FAR 0.39, nearly maxing out at 5.9 FAR. To facilitate the applicant's proposed development, a zoning text amendment is requested to designate MIH in order to increase the maximum FAR, residential FAR. The map above it shows the existing MIH. 1 is within the project area of 6902, of the 6902 rezoning project area. The proposed MIH areas 2 and 3 are coterminous with project areas 1 and 2, respectively. Within the voluntary inclusionary housing areas, R7X districts permit a maximum of 3.75 FAR for developments that do provide affordable housing, that do not provide affordable housing, and a maximum of 5.0 for developments that do provide affordable housing. However, when you do map MIH, in the R7X district, the FAR increases to 6.0, facilitating more affordable units. The maximum community facility FAR remains at 4.0, commercial FAR remains at 2. The text amendment would increase the maximum density. However, the maximum building height, 145 feet or 14 stories, remains the same. The applicant views the additional housing density is appropriate for this wide major thoroughfare, Queens Boulevard, 8 lanes, 4 in both directions, 2 bicycle lanes, protected barriers, as appropriate for this voluntary, beyond the voluntary inclusionary floor area, and would meet the growing housing demands of the area. Absent this action, any affordable housing would be an option, not a requirement. Thank you.
Questions from the commission? And actually, the first thing I'll point out is that the area number 1, for those who, like me, didn't immediately remember the address, it's the project that we approved that had the Long Island Railroad slicing through it and made the connection from the neighborhood to the subway that much more attractive. Commissioner Deleuze.
Do we happen to know the AMI and the local community board here? And the rationale for mapping 1 and 2?
So Community Board 2, the AMI is 71,000. It skews pretty high. This is the far eastern portion of CB2. We're pretty close to CB5 and CB4, just so it gives an idea to illustrate the AMI levels. For CB5 is 63,000, CD2 is 52,000. Option 1 and 2 provide flexibility. It is in 2 different council districts. You can map different areas, two different options for each area.
Yes, Commissioner Levin.
Is this the first time we've had an application that was just an MIH mapping? First time someone has come to ask for the extra density that you get with MIH?
For just the text amendment, yes. Yeah. 6902 was the first to map MIH on existing IH
But that was
with other
in
actions.
conjunction with a rezoning?
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, so I guess it tells you that the incentives that are built into MIH are worth the effort of coming to talk to us.
Yeah, we were pleased to see this because we've been disappointed that after the rezoning with the IH that no one had taken advantage of it, but obviously MIH appears to be leading to housing construction. Commissioner Burney.
Will we get a bit more detailed information about the design of the buildings at some point in terms of floor plans and facade treatment and so on?
The drawings that we had provided to us didn't provide any more detail. I could ask the applicant to see if there's additional that were not provided.
Okay, thanks.
You're welcome.
You'll note that generally in connection with the text amendment, we see very little of the actual building. All this is doing is mapping the ability to, or requirement that MIH take hold.
But it results in a bigger building, so it'd be interesting to see what the design implications of that might be.
Other questions? Okay, then we will refer this to both the community boards and the borough president for 45 days.
Thank you.
Okay, let's see. Item 5 on the agenda has been laid over. Item 6 on our agenda, page 287, is a certification of a disposition of city-owned property in Manhattan Community District 7. In his first appearance before the City Planning Commission is Andrew Cantu.
Hello, good afternoon. This is an application by HPD for the disposition of city-owned real property located at 266 West 69th Street. The property is a 5,000 square foot lot. Excuse me, sir? 96th Street. There you go. The property is a 5,000 square foot lot on the south side of West 96th Street between Broadway and West End Avenue on the Upper West Side, Manhattan Community District 7. The project sponsor and HPD are working to assemble the disposition site on the right, highlighted in yellow, with 2 privately owned properties to the west to construct a 23-story, 125,000 square foot building containing residential and community facility uses. Public financing is anticipated to be through HPD's mixed middle income program. The surrounding area is characterized by mixed-use developments along Broadway, a mix of low and mid-rise buildings, residential buildings along West End Avenue and the mid-blocks, with several institutional uses scattered throughout. The predominant zoning districts in the surrounding area are R10A and R8. A commercial corridor is located directly east of the project area along Broadway, which includes C46A, which is an R10A equivalent, and a C15 overlay. An enhanced commercial district is also located along Broadway, and the Riverside West End Historic District is directly adjacent to the project area to the south and west. This is to give you sort of a sense of the scale of the surrounding neighborhood, which is very typical of the Upper West Side. The proposed development site is highlighted in yellow. The development site is located in an R10A contextual residential zoning district, which permits high-density residential uses subject to quality housing regulations. For developments participating in the inclusionary housing program located on a wide street, a 12-to-1 FAR can be achieved with a maximum building height of 23 stories and 235 feet with a qualifying ground floor. Lot 55 immediately to the east, which is a little bit lower on this photograph, is currently being demolished and anticipated for future as-of-right development under R10A and C46A regulations. Currently, the development site consists of a 4-story decommissioned MTA electrical substation on the disposition site on the left, a 2-story building owned and occupied by the Salvation Army on the lot immediately to the west, and a 2-story building owned by the NAACP Roy Wilkins Center just west of that. The Salvation Army will occupy space in the new development, and the NAACP has opted not to return to the site after construction. Land uses directly adjacent to the project area vary from low-rise commercial to mid and high-rise mixed-use and residential buildings. Immediately west and south of the project area are several multifamily residential elevator buildings ranging from 13 to 16 stories, which you can see in the upper left and upper right-hand photos. On the block immediately north of the project area is a 35-story condo building with ground floor retail along its Broadway frontage, which you can see in the lower left photo. These are just some additional views of the project area looking directly at it and then directly across the street in the lower left-hand photo. The proposed development will consist of a 23-story mixed-use building containing approximately 171 mixed-income rental units with a mix of micro units, 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom, and 3-bedroom units. Approximately 40% of the units, or 68 units, will be permanently income restricted for households earning between 50 and 130% of area median income. The proposal includes approximately 8,000 square feet of ground floor community space, 6,500 of which is intended to be used by the Salvation Army. The project will include several amenities available to all residents, including a gym, 3,400 square feet of indoor amenity space, and an outdoor terrace. The draft environmental impact statement identified significant adverse impacts with respect to historic and cultural resources, as the building on the disposition site is one of the 8 original substations that powered New York City's early subway system, built in 1904. To mitigate adverse environmental impacts, the project sponsor has pledged to incorporate significant features of the substation into the design of the new building, including the first floor facade and ornate cartouches above the 3rd floor, bays that you can see above, and design the new building so that it reflects features and materials of the former substation. So in summary, to facilitate the proposed development, HPD is requesting CPC approval for the disposition of city-owned property, and no modifications or waivers to the underlying R10A zoning district are being sought. I'm happy to take any questions.
Questions from the commission? Commissioner Delahousse.
Do you have an overall unit breakdown by AMI, or is that something we can just, when it comes back, it'd be helpful to have that?
So HPD can speak to that when it comes back. I believe they're still financing the final program with, or finalizing the final program with the project sponsor.
Okay, and to know exactly which of the units are intended to be permanently affordable as well in that, in that grid. And then I'm just, if they could also speak to why the choice of the mixed middle income versus another HPD program that would have brought deeper affordability.
Commissioner Burney.
Is the substation a landmark?
It is not an individual landmark, no.
And it was never calendared for landmark?
I don't believe so, but I can get back to you on that.
Okay, thanks.
Other questions? Commissioner Levin.
Now, when this comes back, there's some really HPD-related questions that I'm going to be curious to get more clarity on. And particularly, I guess my main question here is whether we're getting enough affordable housing out of a significant public asset. I note that the disposition site is approximately half of the total development site, yet we're only getting 40% of the dwelling units as permanently affordable. Optimally, when we're using city-owned land, that ought to be used entirely for affordable housing. So I'm hoping we can get a little bit more affordable housing out of this project.
I can note that HPD will be prepared to address it, and they, in a nutshell, what they have explained to us is, one, that the property that they own alone, it doesn't result in a realistic development proposal, and that this will achieve more than were they to develop their own site. They also point to significant challenges with respect to the remediation that is required for the site. On its own, this site would not qualify for the state's, the city-owned portion would not qualify for the state's brownfield program, but by joining with the 2 adjoining sites, which is where the pollution emanates from, it will qualify for it, making the project.
Yeah, no, I have no quarrel with combining the sites. Yep. It's simply a matter of negotiation, how much the city is going to be able to achieve in terms of affordable housing here, and I think there is a strong argument for pushing for more, and I look forward to the public discussion to to tease that out, including further information about the points that you just raised. I'm also curious about the very high proportion of what they call micro units. What are those units really going to look like, and who's going to live in them, and how are they split between market rate and the affordable units? I think we have to be very careful about building a significant number of those units. We need to know that they're going to meet a neighborhood need. So I look forward to hearing about that when it comes back.
I'll relay all those concerns and questions to HPD.
Other questions? Commissioner Delahoo's.
Just in following up with the micro units, I have limited experience, a couple experiences with project with micro units, and it'd be helpful to know if HPD, when they come back, if they've seen either a higher turn down rate in the affordable housing lotteries for those units, and or the turnover rate in those units compared to other units.
Other questions? Okay, then this application is certified.
All right. Item 7 on the agenda has been laid over as well. Item 8 on the agenda, page 337, is a certification of a zoning map and zoning text amendment in Manhattan Community Districts 2, 3, and 5. Matthew Pietris will present.
Good afternoon. This is a city application for a zoning map and zoning text amendment to extend the Special Union Square District and implement a special permit for new hotel development in the new area. The new area proposed to be Subdistrict B of the Special Union Square District is shown in the black outline on this slide. The existing special district, which would become Subdistrict A, is shown in the gray hatch. The project area is directly south of Union Square, which is shown in green. Generally, the area is bound by 5th Avenue to the west, 14th Street to the north, 3rd Avenue to the east, and East 9th Street to the south. Directly west of the study area is the Greenwich Village neighborhood, which is defined by predominantly residential and institutional uses. To the north is Union Square, which is surrounded by mid to high-rise commercial and office buildings, as well as high-density mixed commercial and residential buildings. The East Village is to the east of the project area, where residential low-rise buildings predominate on the mid-blocks, and slightly taller mixed residential and commercial buildings line the major north-south corridors. To the south are mixed commercial and residential uses, as well as large commercial buildings built on large lots, including some that comprise the entire block. In 1984, the department established the Special Union Square District to encourage mixed-use development on the many vacant and underutilized lots surrounding the park. The most recent zoning change was in 2010, when the department rezoned the 3rd and 4th Avenue corridors to the west of the East Village to a contextual commercial district. That C62A district makes up the eastern portion of the project area. Outside of land use approvals, the department has been in discussion with community stakeholders and elected officials about the land uses in bulk within the project area for the past few years. They've expressed a desire to regulate commercial development amid concerns that the area is overdeveloping with buildings that are out of context with the surrounding area. Understanding these concerns, the department has studied the existing and future land use trends in the area. On this slide, the department first analyzed existing land use, which this chart categorizes by total lot area. The top 4 uses by lot area are mixed residential and commercial, followed by multifamily elevator buildings, commercial and office, and public facilities and institutions. These findings were not surprising, as the neighborhood has been a mix of these uses for the past few decades. On this slide, the color of the symbol represents the land use of new development, while the size of the circle represents the building area. Like the predominant existing uses in the area, new developments are generally evenly distributed between mixed commercial and residential uses, public facilities, and commercial and office buildings. While these recent developments have contributed to the mixed-use character of the neighborhood, they have further limited the supply of buildable land. Because of this, it is important to exercise discretion over land uses, which may have varying impacts depending on their size and location, such as hotels. Because the area contains varying built forms and uses, the form and appropriateness of future hotel development could vary significantly block by location within the project area. These images show the varying context throughout. The top left photo of the new school's recent development demonstrates the strong institutional presence throughout the area, while the photo below demonstrates that these institutional uses, like Grace Church, exist adjacent to both walk-up residential buildings and multifamily elevator buildings with ground floor retail. The center and right images in the top row highlight that 3rd Avenue generally acts as a step down in bulk from the higher density districts to the west to the lower density, predominantly residential East Village. The images in the center and right of the bottom row are taken along Broadway, which is a higher density corridor where commercial and residential uses abut one another at varying scales. However, because the current zoning districts in the area permit hotel development as of right, there are no regulations that require these developments to match the surrounding neighborhood context. To ensure that future developments promote the mixed-use character of the area, the department proposes a new special permit south of Union Square. To achieve this goal, the department proposes extending the special Union Square district, create a new sub-district, Sub-District B, encompassing the project area. That area is shown in red. The existing special district boundaries shown in blue would become Sub-District A. The new special permit in Sub-District B would allow the city to mediate and maintain the mixed-use character of the neighborhood while continuing to connect the more commercial uses in Union Square with the more residential uses in the East Village and the mixed residential, commercial, and institutional uses in Greenwich Village. It is important to note that the proposed special permit does not preclude hotel development, nor does it deem all future hotels inappropriate. Rather, it requires the City Planning Commission to assess the appropriateness of such development based on the local neighborhood context. This is especially important in a neighborhood where maintaining a balance and variety of uses is necessary to the vitality of that neighborhood. Within Sub-District B, the proposed text amendment would establish a special permit to allow new hotel uses, including conversions and enlargements. To be granted the special permit, future hotel developments must demonstrate that they would not impair the essential character, future use, or development of the surrounding area. Besides the hotel special permit, use in bulk within Sub-District B would be governed by the underlying zoning district. Within Sub-District A, the existing regulations of the special Union Square district would continue to apply. In summary, the Department of City Planning proposes a zoning map and zoning text amendment to extend the special Union Square district, create Sub-District B, and require a hotel special permit within that sub-district. Be happy to take any questions.
Vice Chair Knuckles.
Well, I am curious because, as you point out, this is a very varied district in terms of architectural style. You pre-war, post-war, new institutional construction. So if you could, what do you think, what kind of proposal would impair the essential character? What is the essential character of this area, given the varied architectural product that's there now?
Sure. So currently, the mixed use, the character is that it's mixed use. And so the special permit would allow these block by block variations that we see from these tall, big buildings and bigger lots to these smaller mid-rise and low-rise tenement-style walk-ups. So each block then would have a site-specific determination that a hotel would then have to meet those findings.
Each block?
Yeah, the context varies so widely. If one looks at 3rd Avenue going up or 4th Avenue going up through there, very different from the mid-block characters. I know in discussions with community members, many have mentioned the Moxie Hotel, which is along 11th Street, replacing a solid row of 5-story walk-ups with a hotel mid-block. Those would be the kind of case-by-case determinations that the special permit would require us to make. Commissioner Burney.
But why are we picking on hotels? There are lots of buildings that can be out of context and inappropriate. Why especially hotels?
We've seen that hotels are very flexible in where they can be built. So they can be built on very small lots and very big lots. And because these districts have such varying uses, but like if you see in the middle of the screen, the C61, which is the same district, the same zoning regulations apply, but then we see a lot of different uses within there. And then these hotels that could either be these boutique hotels that we see kind of in Greenwich Village, or these larger hotels that we see around Union Square can take a variety of different forms. And so it's that type of use that has such adaptability that's why we're seeking to regulate it.
And this is a discussion that we have been having with the community going back to the prior administration, a longstanding concern. Commissioner Levin.
One of the features of these newly constructed hotels often is that for efficiency of floors of use within the building, they're pushed back from the sidewalk. And I remember when we did the hotel special permit in the M1 districts, a time back, didn't we add into the findings there the possibility of considering street wall features of the proposed hotel?
Within M1, I'm not 100% sure about the street wall feature. This is a little bit different than the M1 because the M1 looked at citywide. We were seeing a trend of these, a lot of hotels are out of context with the low-rise industrial. And so this special permit is more akin to the special districts that we've been seeing, like in East Harlem or East Midtown.
Yeah, I just want to be sure that the finding language is strong enough that if we encountered a design that seemed out of character with the surrounding area, that we would be able to adjust the design rather than the fact of having a hotel.
Okay, so there's currently no design findings as part of this because it's really looking to regulate that use as opposed to the actual street.
Understood.
A lot of the hotels we have seen, like the Moxie and like the Hyatt Union Square, are ones where it is built to the sideline, so we do have that continual street wall, and so there is no required setback at the street level.
Okay, but it
No,
has
you're
happened.
talking about the opposite, where we would want to see it built at the street level without
and
it.
we don't want to see the, the budget hotels that are
Could you put up,
proliferating in
could you
Midtown.
put up the findings?
Sure.
Oops.
I think I skipped that.
No, I'm sorry, the findings that are
findings of this
proposed for
hotel.
this one.
Yeah. Here we go.
There we go.
Okay, I think I would look at the final finding where the commission may prescribe appropriate conditions and safeguards to minimize adverse effects on the character
And
of
so
the
the
surrounding
crux of my
area.
question is that language strong enough for us to require a street wall lineup if we so chose?
Traditionally, essential character has included the built form and as addition to
Okay,
use.
that's the, thank you for making my question more succinct.
Yeah.
Other questions? Commissioner Burney?
I mean, I'm sure there are good reasons for it, but the boundary seems very irregular. And one wonders why certain blocks are in and others are out.
Sure. So yeah, it certainly does at first glance, but you'll notice too that where these kind of sawtooths out is that there's an R72 district here, there's an R72 district here where hotels aren't normally allowed anyway, or they are not permitted. So it kind of becomes more of a regular shape once you incorporate the residential districts.
Commissioner Delauze?
Do you mind going back to the finding language again?
Sure.
Obviously, the language then would also, to the extent that some of the hotels that we've seen or could see would be potentially replacing existing residential uses, including rent-stabilized uses, then obviously this is, I'm just wondering if we want to have stronger consideration of that.
For what the use is replacing? We haven't traditionally seen findings for hotels where it takes into consideration what it is replacing, although typically we don't see a lot of development on rent-regulated uses, and especially within this area because it's so improved. If we look back here, we see a lot of these uses, a lot of the lots are already improved, except for there's this tiny little lot right here, which is an interior lot, and it's about 546 square feet. I think it's used as a backyard. That's the only vacant lot. And within our environmental review, we only found 2 assemblages that would potentially develop, and we do not anticipate that those are rent regulated because they fall below.
I guess I'm really thinking both in terms of hotel use, removing units, whether they're rent regulated or not, for New Yorkers that live here permanently versus those that are visiting. And so I just want to me, that would be a pretty significant issue, for instance.
Okay.
I don't think that traditionally has been part of our findings, although I can imagine individual commissioners would consider that were we to see an application. Other questions? Okay, then the application is certified.
Thank you.
Okay. Item 9 on our agenda, page 370, is a non-ULURP referral of a modification of a restrictive declaration in Manhattan Community District 2. I believe Sylvia Lee is going to introduce this and some background on this project, and then Andrew will present.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. To help set the stage for Andy's presentation about the specific project, I'd like to share some background and context for the action in front of the Commission today. As you know, the Commission doesn't typically see this very often these days. In the past, typically in the 70s through the 90s, the City Planning Commission at times attached a restrictive declaration to a zoning map change action, under which the range of permitted uses that would be typically allowed in the underlying zoning would be further narrowed to more closely follow the proposed project within the rezoning area, or to impose additional restrictions that were deemed appropriate at the time. These declarations were called the D declarations, D-Decs, as they are listed in the Appendix D of the zoning resolution. As the Commission may know, for the past several decades, we've since moved away from the practice of implementing D-Decs for many reasons. And here, I'll only speak to two of them that are most relevant to this action. First, this practice kind of resulted in this two-tier zoning scheme under which the zoning district on the map would not tell the full story of the regulations. One has to go to the specific restrictions in the restrictive declaration in order to find out what set of regulations really applied to a given site. This, in a way, created barriers for understanding the regulations by members of the public, property owners, and also undermined kind of this predictability of a zoning map, a zoning district on a zoning map really meant. Also, these restrictions were often put in place based on a particular set of restrictions or conditions that might not obtain over time, therefore necessitating kind of subsequent modifications of the RDs only to allow uses that are already permitted in the underlying zoning. So as the Commission has seen in the past, most recently, in fact, in 2016, in the 95 Horatio Street project, and we'll see again today, the Gansevoort set of restrictive declarations were recorded in a time where New York City's economic composition, as well as the meatpacking industry, were drastically different from where they are today. And yet these use restrictions in the RDs are still in place, and property owners continue to request that some of these restrictions be lifted. With that, I'll turn it over to Andy to present the application, and we will both be available to answer questions after.
I'll just note that I asked Sylvia to do the special presentation because this is the first time during my tenure that I've encountered this, and this is almost a case study in why we have moved away from D-declarations.
So good afternoon again. This is a private application for a modification to a restrictive declaration to allow for an expanded range of uses in the buildings located at 46 through 74 Gansevoort Street in the Meatpacking District, Manhattan Community District 2. The project area is bounded by Washington Street on the west, Gansevoort Street on the north, Greenwich Street on the east, and Horatio Street on the south, and is located on the block immediately southeast of the new Whitney Museum of American Art and the terminus of the High Line, which you can see in the upper left-hand corner of the map. The project area is composed of 3 individual zoning lots, which I will discuss in more detail. Lot 43 has 2 buildings. The one-story market building at 70 through 74 Gansevoort Street on the corner with Washington Street was built in the early 1940s and was recently demolished to make way for a new 6-story building currently under construction. That's the building with the netting in the foreground of the photo in the lower left. The market building next door at 60 through 68 Gansevoort was built in the late 1880s as 5 tenements and then converted for wholesale food-related uses in the 1940s. It is undergoing major renovations to add 3 additional stories to the existing 2-story structure. Both buildings on Lot 43 will be combined into a single building with a total floor area of just under 75,000 square feet, and construction is proceeding pursuant to LPC approvals. 52 through 58 Gansevoort is improved with 2 market buildings built between 1850 and 1893. Construction of a horizontal addition and major interior and exterior renovations were recently completed pursuant to LPC approvals. Lot 49 has a zoning floor area of just over 13,000 square feet, most of which is currently occupied by a restaurant. 46 through 50 Gansevoort is improved with a market building built in the late 1930s. Construction of a rooftop addition and other interior and exterior work was recently completed, again pursuant to LPC approvals. Lot 54 has a zoning floor area of just under 12,000 square feet and is fully leased to 2 retailers. This is a final elevation of the completed buildings with a site plan below. Once complete, the 3 lots together will include a total of just under 100,000 square feet of floor area. Again, construction is being completed pursuant to LPC approvals obtained in 2016 and 2017. The application before you is only related to use changes. No bulk waivers or modifications are being sought. As you can see in the land use map, the area to the south of the development sites is more residential in character with relatively limited commercial uses at street level, while the area east and north of the site is generally more commercial in character, with most of the ground floors occupied by retail, eating and drinking uses, and galleries. Once a hub of the city's meatpacking businesses, over the years, due to technological changes within the industry and broader macroeconomic trends within the city and region, the surrounding area has seen a substantial reduction in meat-related businesses and an increase in residential, retail, dining, arts and culture, office, hotel, and other commercial uses. Today, the meatpacking district is an upmarket retail and dining destination with a vibrant nightlife scene and a mix of commercial and residential buildings. All of the area's meat-related businesses are now concentrated in the Gansevoort Meat Market Co-op located north of the Whitney. The project area is located at the nexus of manufacturing, residential, and commercial zoning districts in an M15 district, which are medium-density areas that typically allow a wide range of light industrial and commercial uses as of right, such as repair shops, wholesale service and storage facilities, offices, restaurants, and retail. The project site is adjacent to a C6-2A district outlined in red, which was rezoned in 1984 from M15 manufacturing zoning district. The 1984 zoning was intended to facilitate new residential development and conversion of non-residential buildings within the rezoned area. At the time, the environmental impact statement disclosed potential adverse impacts on land use, neighborhood character, and industrial meat production businesses. To mitigate those impacts, the commission required restrictive declarations on several properties, both inside and outside of the rezoning area. And as part of that zoning map amendment, although the project site was not within the rezoned area, a restrictive declaration was recorded against the project site to limit the permitted uses. And as Sylvia mentioned, the practice of requiring DDECs with zoning map amendments is no longer common practice. The restrictive declaration required that the project area be used only for permitted uses, which included specific commercial and light manufacturing uses in use groups 11, 16, 17, and 18. It also required the owner to use best efforts to maintain the industrial space for meat-related use group 17A and 17B uses, and in the event the spaces were to become vacant, to use best efforts to rent to such uses. As the land uses and character of the surrounding neighborhood evolved and diversified away from its industrial roots, the restrictive declaration was subsequently modified twice since 1984. In 1998, the commission approved a very limited expansion of the permitted uses on lot 54 at the corner of Gansevoort and Greenwich to include use group 6, which contains retail, restaurant, and local services uses. After the study of potential impacts, the commission determined that the proposed action was appropriate and reflected the changing mix of uses in the area. In 2003, the commission approved a further modification permitting use groups 6 and 9 on the entire project area to allow for an expanded range of business and commercial services. The commission's approval was subsequently modified by City Council to further exclude use group 6B office uses, eating and drinking establishments with entertainment uses, and eating and drinking establishments of any type in rear yards or on the roof from all the lots in the project area. Bringing us to the subject of this application, which is to remove the prohibition on use group 6B office uses and allow community facility uses in use groups 3 and 4 that are permitted as of right under M15 zoning district regulations. The prohibition on eating and drinking establishments with entertainment uses and in rear yards or on the roof would remain in effect. The proposed modification is considered a major modification under the terms of the restrictive declaration and requires commission and city council approval. I'm happy to take any questions.
Questions from the commission? Commissioner Burney.
Did you say the prohibition on eating and drinking would stay in effect?
It would remain.
Why would that be?
The community board was really, that was a sticking point for them, and they've negotiated with, or they've been in active conversations with the project applicant, and the applicants agreed to maintain those restrictions.
Wow. You couldn't get a nice abattoir to move in.
I'll note that the restrictions are just the entertainment and the rear yard roof.
Right.
Oh, I see. So you could open a restaurant there?
Yes,
Correct.
it's just the two existing restrictions.
It's more the outside component that they were worried about.
Take the party outside.
Commissioner Levin.
Does the applicant have particular tenants in mind for whom they're requesting these changes?
I know that for, let me go back. So for these, I believe that there are two retailers. I think it's Hermes and Brunello Cucinelli.
Oh man, there goes the neighborhood.
And this
Has gone.
lot 49 is Pastis, the restaurant.
Okay.
And
requesting the possibility of community facility use, do they have community facility tenants?
I don't believe that they have identified any of those. I think the community board just wanted the possibility of having community facility uses, should there be any interest.
Thank you.
Other questions? Okay, we'll refer this to the community board for 45 days.
Item 10 on the agenda, page 482, is a non-ULURP post-referral of a City Planning Commission certification in Manhattan Community District 6. Our presenter is Bob Tuttle.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. This is a private application by the owners of 609 to 615 2nd Avenue for a joint MTA and CPC certification of a transit easement in the Kips Bay neighborhood of Manhattan Community Ward 6. The development site, which is shown here centered with the red dashed line, occupies 4 lots that front 2nd Avenue and then an adjoining single lot that fronts East 33rd Street. The site is split between 2 zoning districts. The southern 3 lots are zoned at C18A and the northern 2 lots are a C19A district. The entire site is located within the Special Transit Land Use District. The neighborhood's built environment is a mixture of older walk-up residential buildings and then larger predominantly residential developments such as the 36-story building across 2nd Avenue from the development site, and then also Kips Bay Towers, which are shown at the bottom the bottom right corner of the map. NYU Langone Health Center is located a block east on 1st Avenue. St. Vartan, which is shown here in the top right, is 2 blocks north on 2nd Avenue, and then the 6th train, which is the nearest train, is located a quarter mile west along 33rd Street. So currently this site is mostly vacant, although a single-story building does currently occupy the portion of the site that fronts on East 33rd Street. The applicant plans to develop the site with a 7-story building with cellar space. The building would contain ground floor retail and 30 residential units. Now, the site is within the the Special Transit Land Use District. That special district was established in 1973 in preparation for the 2nd Avenue subway line. Provisions of the special district enable the MTA and CPC to identify locations where transit easement volumes are required for subway-related uses and public access to the subway mezzanine or station. So the 2nd Avenue Subway FEIS, which was completed in 2004, identifies possible locations for entrances and ancillary spaces to support the future 34th Street subway station. And those are shown here in blue, yellow, and then in the hatched patterns. While the preliminary design does not identify the need for an easement on the subject site, there may be limited options available to MDA for construction of the entrances and the ancillary spaces when the 3rd phase of 2nd Avenue Subway is built. In anticipation of that outcome, the MTA has identified the need for an easement on the site is critical as an alternative to the preliminary design, and this would allow the flexibility if redesign of the underground station becomes necessary. Note that a transit easement volume does not count as floor area, and the volume can be used for any uses permitted by the underlying zoning until such time that MTA requires the easement for subway purposes. This was referred to the Community Board and MTA. The Community Board submitted its resolution on October 18th, recommending that transit easement volume be required in order to help achieve the goals of the Special Transit Land Use District, as stated in Article 9, Chapter 5 of the zoning resolution. And MTA submitted a letter on October 22nd indicating that an easement is requested for this site. Now, the action before the CPC is a joint certification of a transit easement pursuant to Section 95-04 of the zoning resolution. The MTA has requested the easement be provided. Since this is a joint certification, the CPC would need to vote in an affirmative to make the easement a requirement on this site. If the CPC votes to require an easement on the site, the applicant can begin their work with MTA to determine the extent of the transit easement volume. Approval of that volume would also require joint certification by MTA and the City Planning Commission. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Questions from the commission? Commissioner Levin.
Bob, in your very eloquent, elegant explanation, you left out the letter that was in our package from the MTA dated September 30th, in which New York City Transit said they do not need an easement at this site. Then we get the community board letter, and then the MTA sent us the letter that you referred to, saying they've taken another look, and now they've decided that an easement is required. Can you give us some background on how that happened and what the additional considerations were, and why should there be an easement here? What are these letters from the MTA don't provide a whole lot of clarity in understanding what it is we're supposed to do.
Right.
Why?
So the MTA, since it's a dual or a joint certification process with a community board referral, the community boards are given 30 days for their resolution. MTA is given 45 to make sure that there's enough time to schedule this meeting so that within 60 days, everything is completed. Because if the commission doesn't respond within 60 days, the application just moves on regardless of, or without ever needing an easement. So early on, MTA, looking at their 2004 FEIS, saw that no portion of that contemplated that this site was going to need an easement. And so that was really more New York City Transit looking at the FEIS and writing a letter to the commission.
Oh, it's not on the map. We don't need to pay attention to it.
Correct. The community board, in their referral, before their 30 days was up, responded that they thought that the MTA should take a look at all of these spaces and in the effort to achieve the goals of Article 9, Chapter 5, which were originally contemplated in 1973, but I think still stand and make a lot of sense. MTA then, as kind of the parent of New York City Transit, took a look at it with Transit and decided that while there is nothing contemplated at this time, they don't expect Phase 3 to begin until later this next decade, in the late 20s. And that there may be a number of things that they just don't know at this time, and hurdles to using the spaces that they've identified, that they may be able to shift the underground station, and then in doing that, be able to use other sites that were not identified as the best option in 2004, but could be great alternatives if those best options don't come to fruition. And so I think that it's maybe a great example of how the referral process works well. The community board identified something, MTA took another look as across their organization and thought that this was reasonable to start to figure out what the volume is. But now that's the second half. So I think to the second part of your question, we don't really know the feasibility of it on this site, and that's what the second certification is there for. They'll work with MTA, they'll define a volume, and that works for the building, still allows it to function with all of its needs. But then that has to come back to the commission as the arbiters of land use for a decision on, we have land use priorities and good planning, and the commission will then have to weigh in on that. If the commission decides that volume is unrealistic for this property, it would be the commission could vote no on the volume, and then that they would no longer be required.
So, but that part of the analysis comes later.
Correct. Stage 2.
All right, so what we're being asked to say here is we think the needs of transit easement here ought to be further understood.
Correct.
And the volume developed.
I think the commission at this point would be saying, MTA has identified that they think that they can find a volume in this space that would work for future planning. We want to see what that volume would look like. So we'll go ahead and require the easement and move on to the second part of this. And when that certification comes back, we'll have the full information of what the volume in Axon will look like. So we'll show how it connects to the station, and then it will show how much of the building space it uses. And then we'll have an understanding also of the programming in that building to see how users of the building will actually be able to get to the upper floors or even use the ground floor.
Okay. And potentially we could then be requiring that the volume be, we're not putting this piece of property into limbo for the duration of the planning period for the Second Avenue subway, are we? I mean, that's
No.
several lifetimes.
Correct.
And is quite a burden to the property owner.
Correct.
But I think what we've seen in other situations is once you figure out what the volume is, it gets reserved, it gets, the building can be built, and that space can be used for some interim use in the meantime.
Exactly.
So you don't just get a piece of vacant land.
Exactly.
Owner gets to move on with their plans.
There are more rare situations with huge developments where they just set aside the volume and they block it off in cement and then they don't use it. Mostly in most projects, they'll use the space because it's at ground level, and they can use it for any of the underlying uses, which in a C18A and a C19A are kind of local retail. And so they could use it until the point at which MTA
But it gets built
identified
and planned with the view to it's possibly in the future being used for.
Exactly. So foundations are built in a way that allows that transition to occur, but for it also still to be used in the interim.
Thank you.
Commissioner Edie.
Thanks. Is there a possibility that given that this location had not been identified previously, that upon this second phase, parties may work together and realize it may not actually work well for the building or for the TA?
There is.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Thank you for the questions, which I think drew out and painted a bigger picture. Basically, what our action today would say is we think it's worth taking a plannerly look at this site to see if it would work. Other comments or questions? Yes, Vice Chair Knuckles.
Bob, you mentioned the phrase acquire the easement, I think you said. The TA acquires the easement. So the owner has been compensated for that easement, or is there an actual taking and compensation?
There would be a compensation later on, but at this point, no. At this point, if the commission votes yes, the easement would be required. They would determine the volume, which then again would need another certification by the MTA and City Planning Commission. And then at a point later down the road, probably in the, if we're lucky, the late 20s, that's when the actual transfer of the development right, or not the development rights, rather the easement volume would take place.
When they exercise it.
When they exercise it. They may never need to exercise it. So they wouldn't pay until they actually did need to exercise.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? Okay, then I will ask for an assent by show of hands to send a letter to the Department of Buildings saying that a transit easement is necessary, which will trigger the second phase. Thank you.
Thanks.
Item 11 on the agenda, page 496, is a non-ULURP post-referral of a minor modification of a previously approved large-scale residential development in Manhattan Community District 3. Our presenter is Matthew Pietris.
Hello again. Here we go. So this is an HPD application that's coming back from Community Board referral. The proposal is a modification to the Seward Park Extension large-scale residential development to remove a block which is currently located in two large-scale developments. As a reminder, the project is in the Lower East Side neighborhood in Manhattan Community District 3. It is generally bound by Delancey Street to the north, Bialy-Stoker Place to the east, Grand Street to the south, and Essex Street to the west. This slide shows the overlap between the Essex Crossing large-scale general development, shown in purple, and the Seward Park large-scale residential development, shown in red. The overlapping portion is in the center of your screen. Because the zoning resolution does not allow property to be located within two large-scale plans, this application is a corrective action to remove that overlapping portion from the Seward Park Extension LSRD. To correct this overlap, HPD proposes subdividing the Seward Park Extension LSRD into two LSRDs, creating Seward Park Extension West, which is shown in blue, and Seward Park Extension East, which is shown in orange, and the existing Essex Crossing LSGD is in purple and will remain unchanged as part of this application. Community Board 3 recommended approval of the application. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions.
The commission may recall that this was presented in conjunction with the Go Broom, the purpose of which was to create an inadvertent overlap of the two. Commissioner Delauze.
So just besides changing colors on the map, nothing material is changing?
Well, they wouldn't actually, the colors are nice, but it would just be a dotted
I know what you
line.
mean.
Yes, correct.
Okay.
Other questions?
It's really planning Arcania.
This is deep wonk, yes. And I will then ask for an assent by show of hands to send a letter to DOB telling them that the proposed mods are minor. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I believe that wraps it up.
Yes,
Thank you.
concludes this review session. The time is 3:36.
Yes.